North Carolina is the Alabama of the 21st century. Okay? Now, let me go through here. Let me double check how many electoral college votes does North Carolina have? Okay, so North Carolina, in the last election, North Carolina had 15 electoral college votes. Okay, so let me give you let me explain why it's important presidential elections. Wisconsin, Trump wins Wisconsin, he wins the election. Wisconsin has 10. Let's go to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 20. North Carolina has 15. Let me go to Michigan. Michigan has 16 electoral college votes. North Carolina has 15. Why am I laying it out to you? You understand why the electoral college vote matters. By Republicans controlling the redistricting in North Carolina, they draw the maps. So they have been rigging the maps. That's why they have a supermajority in the House and in the Senate. Now, guess what? In the last election, they lost the gubernatorial mansion. They then tried to change the law, stripping the governor of his power. They tried to actually strip the state. Let me tell you how insidious they are. They tried to strip most of the powers from the state Supreme Court and gave it to a lower court. Why? Because on the state Supreme Court, Democrats won. A black judge won. Democrats had Democrats have a perceived 4-3 majority on the state Supreme Court. So here's the state Supreme Court, the highest court. Republicans tried to strip power from them to give it to a lower court, a court below the state Supreme Court, to give them more power. That's how insidious this is. And so the judges throwing these maps out is critically important. Now, again, why is it important that Republicans stole the Supreme Court seat from when Obama appointed? Which is, I told you how I feel. I'm still ticked off that Obama did not appoint a black woman to that doggone Supreme Court seat. I personally believe that that would have played a role in even greater turnout had he appointed a black woman to the Supreme Court. But no, he chose to go and Merrick Garland. I thought that was stupid then. I think it's stupid now, and it angers me.
Trump has emboldened these bigots, and they feel like they can say whatever they want to say. Please keep saying what you want to say. Because, see, I'd rather know where you stand. I'd rather know exactly how you feel. I'd rather know how you feel versus, you know, laughing in my face, saying hi, oh, so thank you, how you doing? And then this is how you feel behind closed doors. So, Harley Barber, thanks a bunch. Thanks for the laughs. And now you're going to have to go home to your parents who may not realize that's kind of person you are. They could know that. But see, now everybody knows. So now you got to explain when you go back to New Jersey what happened and why you got booted out of the University of Alabama. And then, of course, when you go apply for other schools, they're going to Google you as well. And they're probably going to have a red flag by your name. Ain't that a shame? It's amazing what happens, what you lose, when you completely act a fool. Donald Trump, of course, hates the Congressional Black Caucus. We now know, based upon the folks who were in the room when he had the meeting about DACA, how he took shots at the CBC, not wanting to meet with him. Well, today, Chief of Staff John Kelly and another aide went to the Capitol Hill to meet with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, trying to come up with a DACA fix. But see, here's the problem. The Congressional Black Caucus is the largest caucus of the Democrats in the House. Yeah, the largest. So you can't ignore the Congressional Black Caucus, Donald Trump. If you want to cut a deal with Democrats, you can't ignore them. And so if I'm Congressman Cedric Richmond, who was the chair, you know what I would do? So remember when they said they were not going to meet with Trump? I would now call for that meeting. I would call for that meeting. And what I would then do is I would say, no, we want to meet with you. We want to sit down with you. But we want the cameras there. We want this meeting wide open. We want everybody to know what happens in this meeting. And I would press him on all the important issues. I would press him on voter fraud. Press him on the Department of Justice. I would press him on his comments about Haiti and Africa. I would have Representative Mia Love there, and I would say, you apologize to her right now for your comments and see what he does.
This is 2018. Why am I going to get excited about a race 3 years away? I want you to think about that. I want you to listen to me. If you're expending your energy right now on Oprah in 2020, you are ignoring the state's attorney races, district attorney races, the judge races, the state senate, the state representatives. You're ignoring the city council races, the mayoral races, the county commissioner races, the school board races, and the congressional midterms. I need y'all to stay focused on what's right in front of you. Listen to me again. I want you to hear me. I need you to stay focused about what's right in front of you. What's right in front of you are these local elections. That's what's right in front of you. If you're sitting here running around trying to worry about 2020, you're overlooking what's happening right in front of you. Do you understand that Obama won in 2008, and you know what happened? Everybody got so excited, and they were wonderful, and they were happy, and they forgot about the 2010 midterm elections. What happened in 2010? 16 state legislatures flipped. They were either Republican, Democrat, or they were controlled by Democrats, and they flipped. Republican then took control of the majority of the state legislatures in the country. Guess where the voter suppression laws began? After 2010. Guess where the voter ID laws began? After 2010. Guess what happened after the 2010 midterm elections? They took control of state legislatures and they started redrawing the districts. Everything I just told y'all about, the Supreme Court case in Ohio, the other cases, all of what's happening in North Carolina, all of these things were a result of the legislatures flipping in 2010. This is what happens when you keep your eye off the ball, when you're focused on something else. I need you to focus on what's in front of you. This now is January. It's almost the middle of January. I need you to be focused on what are the upcoming primaries. So, for instance, Stacey Abrams is running for governor of Georgia, okay, on the Democratic side. The primary is in March. If you're in Georgia, I need you to focus on that. I need you to focus on the elections in Georgia, the statewide elections. That's what you focus on. Andrew Gillum, the brother, is running for Florida governor. That's in August. I need you to focus on that. August of 2018, not Oprah in 2020, okay? I just met a sister who's running for county executive. She's a state's attorney in Maryland. I met her at First Baptist Church of Glenarden on Saturday. I think she told me that the primary is in June. I need you to stay focused on that. Not what Oprah's going to do. Focus on what that sister's going to be doing. I need you to be focused on what's in front of you. Stop getting caught up in the media hype. That's what it is. It's media hype. I'm not dissing Oprah. If Oprah wants to run, great. If Oprah doesn't want to run, great. That's all her decision. But what I'm saying is you're making a critical mistake if you are focused on 2020 and then you are ignoring what's right in front of you. That is a mistake, people.
So Trump is getting blasted left and right for these comments, as he should. And so I'm looking at all of these different people. I'm looking at all these folks. I'm looking at, all these folks commenting. And do you know why I'm laughing? I'm not laughing, but what I'm trying to understand, why are people shocked? Oh my God, I just can't believe this. I can't believe these things that he was saying. Why? He opened his campaign with a racial attack on Mexicans. Why are you shocked? This is who he is. This is what he thinks. This is what he feels. This is the guy, oh, to black folks, what the hell you have to lose? He has no, he's uncouth. He has no understanding of people. He has no understanding of what folks think. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. And let me be real clear. His supporters don't care. Do you understand what I'm saying? Joe Arpaio was on with Ari Melber tonight. He said, there's nothing Donald Trump can say I don't agree with. He's a flat-out racist. He's an 85-year-old racist. Donald Trump's 71, 72, whatever he is. That's what they are. This is no shock. And so while people are expressing righteous indignation, what do y'all think? Hashtag we tried to tell you. Y'all, if you listen to the speech that I gave earlier today at Alabama A&M, I talked about this. I literally talked about this. I said there's a fear in America over the browning of America. There is this desire for America to still be white. That's what this is. We're going to call this what it is. There is a fear of the browning of America. You see the flag behind me? This flag came from the set of my TV One show, Washington Watch. Infused in this flag, Howard designed all these images of African Americans. The stars here. If you look at the stars on here, you got Mahalia Jackson, Colin Powell, Will Smith. You've got Madam C.J. Walker, Max Robinson. You've got Huey P. Newton. You've got Harriet Tubman, Dorothy Height. You've got Arthur Ashe, Spike Lee. You've got Hank Aaron, Michael Jordan, Sidney Poitier, Oprah, Frederick Douglass, Richard Pryor. You've got Paul Robeson. You've got Stevie Wonder. You've got Michelle Obama. You've got Josephine Baker, Ray Charles, Quincy Jones. You've got Maya Angelou. You've got Rosa Parks, Miles Davis, Dick Gregory. You've got, yes, like I say, Paul Robeson, Tiger Woods. You've got Jackie Robinson. You've got Ralph Abernathy. You've got Coretta Scott King. You got Ben Carson up here. You got Lorraine Hansberry. You got Adam Clayton Powell. You've got Richard Roundtree, Michael Jackson, Condoleezza Rice, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, and I think, so there are about three, let's see here, Garrett T. Morgan. These are all African Americans. Sidney Poitier, Colin Powell. Two great Americans, but guess what? Parents immigrated from Caribbean countries. Those are the very countries Donald Trump talks about. Malcolm X, daddy, same thing, from one of those countries, one of those shithole countries. That's how he feels. We need more folks from Norway. What do you think that means? This plays right into the hands of what his supporters think. They're not going to abandon him. They're going to praise him. David Duke will praise him. Richard Spencer will praise him. They will love this. They will tout this. So I need you to understand that. But what did I also tell y'all the other day? They're going to come after us because of voter suppression, because of what we did in Alabama, because what happened with black women turning out in massive numbers in 2008 and 2012, because that is power. Donald Trump and people like him don't like the browning of America. They want America to remain a white nation. They see folks who look like me as a threat. I'm one of those people. On my mom's side, my mom's father, my grandfather, his folks, his parents migrated from Haiti to Louisiana. I am a descendant of Haitians. And so Donald Trump is talking about folks like me. He doesn't want folks like me in America. His supporters don't want that because they believe we are the reason that they don't have jobs. Because they want this to be the America in the 1950s when black folks had both feet, the nation's feet on their necks and on their backs, kicking them, belittling them, degrading them. That's what they desire. And so I keep telling y'all, stop falling for the okie doke. Stop falling for the misdirection. If you want to respond, you don't just express anger and resentment to what he said. In fact, when the story broke earlier today, according to media reports, he was actually taping his MLK address. The White House shouldn't even release that because it's frankly a waste of time. But I need y'all to listen to me and what I'm trying to explain to you. Get back at Donald Trump at the ballot box. You defeat those who support him and his policies. You defeat those who support his viewpoints. That's how you do it. You defeat those by ensuring that our kids get an education. Somebody asked me outside, I said, what do you think about Oprah 2020? I said, I don't care. But here's why I said I don't care. I can't focus on 2020 when Stacey Abrams is going to be in the Democratic primary for governor of Georgia in March this year. When Andrew Gillum is a brother running for governor of Florida, that primary is August this year. There's a sister who is running for county executive in Prince George's County, who's now a state's attorney. That primary is in June of this year. If you are focusing on 2020 and you are literally ignoring judges and DAs and state reps and state senates and governors in 2018, your priorities are mixed up. You can't complain about the issue in terms of these laws if you don't understand that, yes, in certain places, the city council and the mayor hires the police chief or city manager form of government. And so we saw it after Ferguson, 67% black folks living in Ferguson, but you only had a small percentage increase of black turnout in the next election. And I know some people are watching or sitting here and they say, well, you know what? I hear what you're saying, but I just don't believe the vote's going to count. Well, tell that to the woman who just lost the Virginia House of Delegates seat by a coin flip because they were tied. Tell that to the folks, of course, when Trump wins Wisconsin by less than 100,000 votes. But the voter ID law that was passed in Wisconsin kept 200,000 folks from voting. And that voter ID law was passed because after the 2010 midterm elections, Republicans took control of the entire state legislature. Tell that in North Carolina where the same thing, where black turnout dramatically increased after 2008 and they begin to change all the voting laws. The point, as Gwen said, if voting didn't matter, they would not be working so hard to stop folks from voting. A lot of us talk about, well, vote, it's important. Jimmy Lee Jackson died. That led to Bloody Sunday. And so I tell folks, you know what? If you can't get somebody young to understand Jimmy Lee Jackson, that's fine. So you should do this. If somebody says, why should I vote? Your response should be this here, because Eric Garner can't. Why should I vote? Because Rakia Boyd can't. Why should I vote? Because Ayanna Jones can't. Why should I vote? Because Trayvon Martin can't. And so if you don't want to use examples from the 50s and 60s, that's fine. Use the examples of the young brothers and sisters today who can't vote because they were killed. That will get their attention. All right, folks. We are here live at the historic Shiloh Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. It is, of course, State of the Union night. And, of course, down the street, Donald Trump will be giving his first State of the Union to a joint session of Congress. Of course, last year he spoke before Congress, but it was actually a presidential speech. It wasn't actually a State of the Union. So how did we even get to this particular point here? Not him being in the White House, but of course this event. Well, I was at the NAACP Image Awards where they had the NAACP pre-award show, where I won again back-to-back Best Host by the Image Awards. I appreciate it. And so I saw a tweet that Congresswoman Frederica Wilson was going to be boycotting tonight's State of the Union. Already, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, as well as Congressman John Lewis, said they were not going to be attending after, of course, Donald Trump's comments, then, of course, when it came out about Haiti and Africa and all other kind of comments. And so while I was there, I said, you know what? We should do something, because a lot of people said they were not going to be watching his speech tonight. I said, well, you know what? We should have our own conversation, the real state of our union. And so I was standing there, so I began to text several members of Congress, hey, what do you think? And then I ran to Derrick Johnson, of course, President, CEO of the NAACP. He said, great idea, let's do it. And that's how this thing got started. And then, of course, the next day was MLK Day, when I got, of course, that Tuesday, the 16th. I then said, well, man, where can we do this in D.C.? So I called my buddy Maurice Watson, and when he was installed as the pastor of a church here in D.C., he actually had the installation here. And I said, you know what? Shiloh would be a great choice. And so when I called Pastor Wallace, literally it took him 10 seconds to say yes. And he said it dovetailed perfectly with the church's focus this year when it comes to social justice, when it comes to where we're going in terms of our politics and our policies. And so I'm so glad that he said yes to this. I'm glad to see all of you here as well. We're going to have a fantastic conversation. But I can also say this here. I can guarantee you there is no network tonight on television you will see this many black people talking about the real state of our union. I guarantee you. And so, of course, for the last 4 years, we had News 1 Now on TV 1, and when the decision was made to cancel the show, our last show was December 21st, I said, well, guess what? I own my own cameras, so it's not like I need to ask anybody permission, so we would do this thing ourselves, and so that's why we are here. And so we're glad to have you here as well. We have people who are watching us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Periscope. The folks at Twitter have made us one of their featured broadcasts for tonight as well, and so we certainly appreciate that. And so we want to kick this thing off. Of course, we are in the house of the Lord, so we're going to pass you to come on up and please begin this with a prayer. And then we'll step on up. So y'all want to do this? Y'all ready? Y'all ready? Okay, come on. Here we go. Reverend Doctor. See, my wife got her doctorate, so she's not Reverend Doctor as well. And so that's how we do it.
Thank you, sir. Let's just pray and give thanks. Lord God, we come at a time in which this nation is in turmoil. There is chaos all around. And Lord, we know that just down the street tonight there will be as much fake news as any of us ever heard. But Lord, we've gathered here for the Real State of the Union program. We've gathered here and we want to thank you for Brother Martin and his leadership. And we thank you, God, for all the persons who have attended and for all who are watching through streaming. And we just believe that if we stand together, we walk together, children, and don't get weary, there is indeed a great camp meeting. And we know, Lord, that the camp meeting will be November 2018. We ask that you will bless our efforts to bring truth back to this nation of lies and recriminations. In Christ Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. In 2009, at the inauguration of President Barack Obama, the folks at the Obama Gilead held their black church inauguration ball, and I happened to be the MC of that particular ball, and that's where they debuted this amazing video, Lift Every Voice and Sing, but using a lot of the historical images of African Americans. And so when we were talking about, my producer said, well, how do you want to start this thing? I said, one, we'll start with prayer. I said, and since we got folks complaining about us kneeling when it comes to the national anthem, and they were not kneeling about the anthem, they were actually kneeling about police brutality in America, which the media somehow forgot. I said, well, we're going to open this real state of our union with Lift Every Voice and Sing. And so we have the audio in the house, but for the folks who'll be watching the live stream, they'll actually be seeing that particular video, many of them likely for the very first time. So if you could please, if you can, stand up, and we will begin, of course, doing it our way with Lift Every Voice and Sing. You may be seated. Now, the black is open to a State of the Union. I'm just saying. And then, of course, any of you who've seen that video, it's an unbelievable video. And so if you haven't, go online. You can actually check it out. Let's introduce our first powerhouse panel. To the far end over here, of course, Melanie Campbell, Black Women's Roundtable. Give it up for Melanie. Kristen Clarke, she is a leader of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Of course, you always got to have a good alpha man on the panel, so I had to call Dr. Greg Carr, Chair, Afro-American Studies, Howard University. He's still a newbie in the position, President and CEO of the NAACP, Derrick Johnson. One of the things that we always did, of course, with News 19, we wanted to be able to show folks, different African Americans in different fields. They may not see them. And so if you have never seen a black economist, that's Dr. William Spriggs right there, of course. AFL-CIO, also Professor of Economics, Howard University. And so certainly glad to have him. Well, and of course also Liz Copeland. She's head of the Urban Conservative Project. Give it up for Liz. All right, so Bill, I want to start with you. And so in the past week or so, we've heard President Trump touting the black unemployment number, saying that his policies are the reason why black unemployment is at its lowest on record. And so tonight, when he gives his speech at 9 p.m. Eastern, he, of course, is going to spend lots of that time talking about the economy. Earlier today, I was one of the television anchors who was at the luncheon at the White House with the president, along with folks from CNN, ABC, MSNBC, all of the different networks. And so the economy is going to be a huge part of it. Give us your perspective in terms of where we are in terms of reality with our state of our union when it comes to the economy.
So I'll start with the good news. The good news is beginning in 2010, the economy started to expand.
Okay, I want you to repeat that. It started when?
In 2010.
So it didn't start after Election Day in November 2016?
No.
Got it,
no.
2010, got it.
2010.
So 6 years ago.
6 years ago.
Obama was president, right?
When President Obama.
Okay, got it, I'm just checking.
And somebody kept claiming he wasn't president because he wasn't born in the United States. So this would be the rooster claiming they made the sun rise because they were crowing. So let's be clear, when he took office, he inherited the lowest black unemployment rate that any president inherited. So he started from the lowest black unemployment rate any president started with. And it had been declining since 2011. So essentially he got on a train that was already moving. Way past it had already started to move. The good news is it continued to move in the direction that started way before he got elected. The good news is that President Obama not only left him with the lowest black unemployment rate any president inherited, he gave him black income that was rising, and the median income for black families and households was always already on its way to the record it set in 1999 on the basis of the longest string of successive months of positive job growth. So this was already running before
during the campaign, Trump said, don't believe those job numbers, but those job numbers set up where we are today.
Exactly. So that's the good news. The bad news is last year we had the slowest job growth since 2010. 2010 when the economy started expanding.
And meaning the nation.
Meaning the nation. And for African Americans and for Latinos, the share of people holding a job, the employment to population ratio, so not unemployment, but what share of people have a job, that was already starting to accelerate, and it started to accelerate back in 2011. So a disproportionate share of that job growth had already been going to Black and Latino families because the share was going up for us. Our labor force participation rate has been going up as it has for Latino families. It has not gone up as much for whites. So all that's the good news of what this president inherited. Here's the bad news. So the bad news was we had a slowdown overall in job growth. The other bad news is that union density, the share of people who are members of union, continued to decline. African Americans have the highest union density of any ethnic group. Black men are more likely to be union members than anyone else. The bad news is we have had the biggest decline in union density of anyone else.
Also, when you say bad news, Black unemployment is still double that of white folks.
It is still double that, and under this president, the last 2 months, the unemployment rate for Blacks who had associate degrees was higher than whites who only finished high school. And for 2 of those months, whites who were dropouts. So he reversed the trend where we had finally gotten the labor market where with our higher level of education, we could attain their unemployment rate with less, where they had less education. So that was disturbing in the last couple of months. Hopefully that will reverse as the labor market continues to tighten. Not, again, because he's gotten us on a faster path. He didn't even keep us on the path he inherited, but at least he's not messed it up yet.
Melanie, the reality is Black women start businesses at a faster rate than anybody else in the country, but we've seen an increase in the number of Black-owned businesses. 4 or 5 years ago, we had 1.9 million Black-owned businesses. Now we have 2.6 million. But the problem is when we had 1.9 million, 1.8 million only had one employee. Now with 2.6 million, 2.5 million only have one employee. The other problem is that when we had 1.9 million Black-owned businesses, they had an annual revenue of $110,000. Now we have 700,000 more Black-owned businesses, but their annual revenue is $78,000. And so when we talk about where we are with this economy, Black women are significant driving forces, but are still, as Bill just laid out, running into these serious headwinds of an economy that does not fully appreciate, one, their Blackness, two, them being Black women. And so when you are traveling around the country and are talking to sisters, what are they saying about the state of our union?
Thank you, Roland, and really, really thank you for doing this, right, to have this conversation. Well, we're mad as heck. I have to say heck, right? But we're mad as heck, but we're focusing on leveraging our politics, being even more strategic with our politics. The reality is for Black women, you talk about entrepreneurship, the reality is the average Black woman still retires with $100 in wealth, whatever unless you're in the higher echelon. So the reality about poverty, which Reverend Barber last night said the fact that we don't talk about poverty enough, and it's definitely escalating in our communities. So, but the reality for Black women is we're looking at our politics very differently. We're not going to have it that someone's going to take our vote for granted. We are the #1 vote when it comes to progressives being elected, but yet that doesn't reflect in when you look at who's the leadership is. So that's why you've seen what I call a power shift, right? You're seeing more when it comes to what happened with the Women's March, albeit, a lot of it's not necessarily seen as a Black women's march. Many Black women were part of that march, and being a part of that movement. You see Black Lives Matter, led by Black women, Black Women's Roundtable. You see Black women in labor, and all over. And we're organizing ourselves, and you're seeing Black women who are starting more political organizations and really looking at how we should think. We've been challenging the Democratic Party, but the reality is for, how many consider yourselves millennials in this room, right? Right. So with millennials, they look at it, you know, Roland, we do that poll every year with Essence, right, that comes out. And so when it came out this year, and thank you for sharing that knowledge about it, well, look, 11% of black women, that number went up when it comes to we don't think the Democratic Party represents our interests. And when you look at millennials, it's even higher. So anybody with any sense of thinking about their future as a party needs to understand that black women are looking at this differently. And when it comes to this election that we're in, running for office, making sure if you're serious about, you say we are your number one vote, then invest in black women's leadership, invest in black women-led organizing. Because when we do what we do, we take it for everybody. But at the end of the day, the politics of, you know, we're just a number, no. We're leading the vote. We turn out the vote. We're leading and organizing. Look at Alabama. If black women hadn't showed up, we'd be having a different college class. And black women didn't just show up, and they're challenging Doug Jones every day. You know, he can go over there all he wants to. He'll just be in there for 2 years because we're going to show up again. Right. So I'll stop there.
Derrick Johnson. Economy. We've heard Donald Trump talk about creating jobs. He started off saying he saved these carrier jobs. By the end of December, those jobs were leaving the country. A lot of people didn't realize that although you were seeing largely white folks on television with those jobs, 50% of those carrier employees at the Indianapolis plant were African American, although you never saw many of them. And it was interesting, Derrick, a lot of those folks last month in December were upset, crying, complaining, said, we got bamboozled. And I tweeted, and I've been using it since last year, hashtag, we tried to tell you. And so all of a sudden, you're hearing even Trump voters say, wait a minute, I thought these things were going to happen. Now all of a sudden, it's not happening. And we're going, we tried to tell you. And so they're even touting, of course, the decision by one of the automotive companies to build another plant in Alabama. They're talking about jobs in Mississippi as well. But what we're describing is different because retail jobs going by the wayside. 40,000 tourism jobs have left because of the billions lost when he became president. And so this idea that jobs are exploding all across the country, not necessarily the case.
You know, this is the first time in my memory where the veracity of the information coming from the White House is always in question. The beautiful thing about what has happened, it has reinforced the collective consciousness of African Americans across the country. And the reality we must deal with is that with our collective consciousness, our true power is in the midterm election as we look forward. The next 5 years are the most critical periods in the civic engagement calendar that we're going to see. We have the midterm elections. 88 legislative bodies are up for re-election out of 97. We had the census. This administration is cutting the census budget. There will be fewer enumerators, meaning that if there is an undercount in our community, there's fewer federal dollars flowing to our communities. We have redistricting. We have presidential elections. We have midterm elections. That's the next 5 years. And let's be clear, those who are upset now are working poor white folks. And I've always said working poor white folks are the most brainwashed folks you can ever find. It is important for us as an African-American community, whether we consider ourselves one party affiliation or another, to lean into our collective consciousness. Rely on our instincts of what's right and wrong and turn out to vote. Nothing else matters.
We've had many of these conversations on News One now. You voted for Trump. He said, I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to make America great again. He now, yesterday, the luncheon today, he talked about he wants to unify the country. And that was kind of interesting hearing that from him. I'm going to read the actual full quote a little bit later. Your perspective in terms of when you hear the president talk about how, in glowing terms, how the economy is doing so great as a result of his policies.
Yeah, so it's really disappointing. When I voted for Trump, I was adamantly against Hillary Clinton. I didn't want to reward her, especially with her statements with, super predators during the 90s. I didn't feel like she was deserving of my vote. And I joke with my Democratic friends, like, I didn't think this was really going to happen. Like, I thought y'all was going to pull it off. And then it happened. And I started to see, he said he was going to be presidential. And he never was presidential. He was never able to come up with a coherent thought. Just from the inauguration, him saying that it was the largest crowd he's ever seen, just always boasting and always talking from both sides of a policy issue, even the Republican Party not even really knowing where he stands. As far as the economy is concerned, this tax reform is major legislation. We haven't had tax reforms in 30 years. But it wasn't the president who was a part of it. It was a bipartisan group in Congress who actually had the audacity to do what the voters asked them to do and try to come up with something. But the policy itself, I'm sure you're well aware of it, it's almost like a trickle-down economy. The thought behind it is to give more money, cut the tax break to corporations so that they can invest in their companies. And there are some companies who are doing that. I think it was Walmart who said they were going to give a $1,000 bonus. And that, I think, is just a piecemeal approach to trying to fix the economy. We need, African Americans especially, need more access to job training. We need dollars to job training. And this administration is just not doing that. They're holding back funding for health and human services in certain cities that they're deeming sanctuary cities because of their debate on immigration. And that's harmful to African Americans. So as you sit here as a Republican and you look at it, you don't feel like this State of the Union address is going to unify anyone. It's not going to be any different from any of the political rhetoric that he's ever spoken before. And it's disappointing. You talked about the midterm elections, and there are 8 chairmen in the House. One from the Appropriations, the most powerful committee. They're retiring. They're not seeking election again. It's possible that we could have a Democratic wave in 2018. Now, there are 33 Republican governors, and some of them are very popular, like in Maryland with Larry Hogan. But the reality is that the Democrats are getting their act together, and they're unifying not just progressive. They're unifying independents and moderates who are just so dismayed, especially people of black and brown color that are sitting in the Republican Party. So, for us, we need to be issue-oriented and not partisan, because the party politics are always going to look out for them. We need to be able to look out for ourselves.
Kristen. So at today's luncheon, this is what Trump said. Let me just say this. I want to see our country united. I want to bring our country back from a tremendous divisiveness which has taken not just over 1 year, over many years, including the Bush years, not just Obama. You go back to the Bush years, you go back to the Clinton years, you take a look at the impeachment of Bill Clinton. I actually asked a longtime senator, happened to be a Democrat, is this the worst you've ever seen it? He said, absolutely not. During the impeachment of Bill Clinton was much worse than this. So many of you are too young to remember that. I feel too young to remember it, but I guess I'm not. Okay. But there's been tremendous divisiveness, not in the last year, there's been tremendous divisiveness for many years. I would consider it a great achievement if we could make our country united, if I could unite the country. That's not an easy thing to do because the views are so divergent. How would you respond?
Quite the stream of consciousness.
Oh, no,
but
there's actually more.
well, in every respect with President Trump, his words, his actions, his policies, his appointments, in every respect in the first year of the Trump administration, all we've seen is politics of division. I think that there is no president who has done more in recent time to divide our country along lines of race, along lines of gender, LGBT status, you name it. This administration, I think, has taken our country back decades. And we have a tremendous amount of work to do once this chapter is closed, I think, to repair our country. When you think about the spike in hate crimes over the past year, when you think about Charlottesville and the president's words and his inability to condemn the actions of white supremacists. I spent this morning actually with Heather Heyer's mother and with other hate crime victims across the country. The widow of the man of Indian descent who was shot and killed outside of a bar in Austin, Texas. When he was shot, the man yelled, "You're Iranian and I need you to get out of my country." it's hard not to trace a lot of the ugly hate and animus that we're seeing right now. It's hard not to trace it back to this White House. Whether you're talking about the Muslim ban or reigniting the war on drugs or the horrendous comments that this president has made about people of African and Caribbean descent, I'm deeply troubled about the wedge that President Trump has placed inside our country.
Greg Carr, obviously these buzzwords, I want to unite the country. But when you look at polling numbers, his numbers are not above 40%, even though he is enjoying tremendous support among Republicans. You have folks who say he uses his Twitter feed to bash people, to berate people, not acting presidential as well. And then when you begin to look at what's happening, and we'll get into it in a bit with immigration as well, many say this is cold, it is heartless in terms of the treatment of DACA folks. And so as you look at the state of our union, what are you saying in the classroom to your students who are the folks who are going to have to deal with this for 8, 10, 16, 20 years into the future?
Well, first of all, thank you, brother. This is pioneering a format that I think really is the future in terms of how we need to think about how we can communicate. And it's good to see so many people who are older than millennials here, because that means that you're reaching out beyond the airwaves. I mean, TV One may have made a mistake, but clearly it didn't stop you from doing what you need to do. So I appreciate that, brother. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said may have made a mistake, but opportunity, that's how it happens, right? I'm having a difficult time in the classroom, brother. Quite frankly, P.S., give to these HBCUs, right? Absolutely. Because young people, and I think about a brother who lived down the street, Carter Woodson, right? Who, in the Miseducation of the Negro, talked about the fact that our black elite, as we are educated, aren't educated into using those skills to uplift the race, but rather to be representative Negroes. I'm the first here, I'm the first there. Woodson said, doesn't do us any good. The challenge I think we have is to understand fundamentally what's going on, and it begins with education. These people are very clear. They're extremists, but they're also white American nationalists, and there's no such thing as the United States of America. It's an aspirational concept. It's an idea. We have to understand that Smiling Mike Pence, when they impeach Trump, this may be his only State of the Union. This guy is about as Christian as Osama bin Laden was a Muslim. The man is a Christian fundamentalist. What I'm trying to help students understand and to walk through is things that Kristen has been talking about for a very long time. You know, most of the federal cases in this country that are heard before judges are heard at the district court, the 94 district courts, the 13 districts, including the D.C. Circuit. Trump just got another judge approved today for the 8th Circuit, an extremist out of Minnesota who is questioning gender and everything else, who's saying that maybe we read Brown versus Board exactly wrong. This is what they are doing. The Federal Society is going to reappoint the federal bench. We can win an election. By the way, the Koch brothers have already announced they're going to dump tens of millions into the midterm elections. We're talking about elections, but what I'm trying to help students understand is we got to have deep study to understand what is really going on. And so when you think about the federal bench, when you think about the fact that Samuel Alito asked for briefs from the other side in this Pennsylvania redistricting case 2 days ago that involves the Pennsylvania state constitution only, it's not a federal issue. But this white man has intervened at the Supreme Court because they are going to put the court in a position to unify this country around white supremacy. That violates federalism. That violates states' rights. And so, Roland, my challenge, our challenge, I think, particularly as it relates to education, and Bill and I are in there every day in this classroom, is to help our young people understand that the world we need to prepare for does not end at the borders of this country. Derrick and I were talking about W.E.B. Du Bois' 150th anniversary of his birth this year. Du Bois got in trouble when he started looking internationally. I'm a Haitian. I'm a Nigerian. I'm a South African. And we start couching this in terms of American politics, that's the day we lose. Because we have never in this country made any progress when we only look toward this red, white, and blue concept as our saving grace instead of looking at the common humanity of the people on the planet as the only thing we should be representing.
You talked about the federal courts. Anybody can jump in, so that I don't have to point anybody out. But I'm going to start with Christian, but everybody else can just jump in and want to make their comment. couple of weeks ago, Congressional Black Caucus held a hearing on Capitol Hill. I sent my cameras there. I live streamed that as well. We all talked about his federal appointees and his nominees even within his administration. It's essentially lily white men. The number of appointments, I think only one African-American judge, only one female judge. Talk about this assault on the judiciary and what Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is doing, how they are literally telling Democrats, forget blue slips, forget holes, everything that was always the practice of the United States Senate. They want to rush as many, as Greg just said, far-right judges on the federal bench as they can, because they don't know how much longer they'll be in control of the United States Senate.
Yeah. So this is a huge issue. Trump takes office, he inherits one vacant seat on the Supreme Court. We know how that turned out, but 140 vacancies exist across our federal court system. We got three branches of government, the executive, the legislative. The judiciary has always mattered a great deal to black people. This is where we have won some very important victories on the civil rights front. Brown versus Board of Ed, all the way to the present day. This has been one of the places of last resort for us to bring some very important battles when it comes to fighting for civil rights in our country. So we can't turn a blind eye to what Trump is doing with the courts right now. 99% of cases heard in this country are not heard by the Supreme Court, they're heard by these federal district courts and circuit courts. 91% of Trump's nominees are white. 81% of them are male. This does not reflect America today. And he is turning the clock back to the Jim Crow era with his approach to judicial nominations. The kind of nominee that he is putting forth are people who are fringe. I'm not talking about people who are conservative. I mean, he's Republican. It's his prerogative to pick people who are politically aligned with him. We're talking about people who are way out there.
Well, first of all, he appointed one guy who had never, ever filed a motion.
Right.
Another guy who had only been a lawyer 3 years.
Right.
I mean, people who you wouldn't hire to, frankly, fill out a will.
Unqualified. There's one nominee who said that transgender kids are Satan's children. There's another nominee, Thomas Farr, out of North Carolina, who worked on the Jesse Helms campaign and defended Jesse Helms during a time where he was accused of engaging in voter intimidation against black people. The campaign was sending out leaflets to the black community, giving them the wrong information about the time and place for voting. And this is a man who, throughout his career, all he's done is defend voter suppression tactics in that state. Nominated for a vacant seat in North Carolina in one of the districts with one of the largest African-American populations that's never had an African-American judge appointed to the court.
The two senators from North Carolina blocked two black women from being appointed to that particular federal
seat. Highly qualified. One a state judge and one a public defender. So this is a critical issue that we can't turn a blind eye to. It's also, we got to remember these are lifetime judges, lifetime appointments. You can't turn the clock back. We are talking about the potential to transform our courts for generations to come. And what's happening is that they're stacking the nominees. They'll put several of them on a calendar for one day. They'll race through them. We got lucky in smoking out Peterson. He got smoked out by a senator from Louisiana who started on this line of questioning.
Senator from Louisiana,
Republican.
Who was so offended that this guy was frankly idiotic.
But shamefully, they are not taking their time with the other nominees. One got through the cracks today. And what's sad about this is the first time in more than 30 years where the Senate has abandoned this traditional practice. Usually, a judge is nominated, and you get blue slips from the two home state senators. And they've now said, we're going to do away with that rule. And they moved forth with a nominee today where there weren't two blue slips for the first time in 30 years. So they're casting out tradition, they're breaking the rules, but most importantly, Trump is putting forth people who have no business getting a lifetime appointment to our courts.
Let me have this. It's very important, picking up on what you just said, Kristen. The blue slip came from Al Franken. The Democratic Party holding itself out as the moral center of the government is a purebred joke. They sacrificed Al Franken. And you see what happened with Congressman Conyers in Michigan. The governor of Michigan said, oh, we'll just hold the seat vacant for a year almost. We don't need to have, Detroit don't need no representation. These people are not playing politics with the concept of America. So asking them to put party over, country over party, they don't have a concept of country that involves you. They're going to do whatever they need to do. So Franken's blue slip, you get him out of the Senate. Now, the sister who replaced him had a blue slip. They ignored it, you're right, for the first time in decades. But I'm thinking about your home state, Derrick, in Mississippi. When you think about local politics, we've got to now turn inward and organize on the local level. What they're going in Jackson, Mississippi with young Chokwe Lumumba's son, Antar. It's very important for us to now understand that politics is not just nationalist, local, and that our allegiances have to be to each other and to humanity. And when the Democrats come calling for our votes, and I agree with Melanie, what you said, absolutely. Black women, black men, black people in Alabama put Doug Jones in there, and now he's going to line up behind Joe Manchin. Well, guess what, Chief? You got 2 years. And if we need to all show up, then we will show up and turn you out, because our allegiance can't be the party. Our allegiance has to be to it, because, and then finally, I'll just say this finally. Mitch McConnell is as much a Republican as Stephen Miller or Paul Ryan. These are wholly owned corporate subsidiaries in the last 2 cases. And in the case of Stephen Miller, who, if you remember when he was at Duke University, is the one who jumped on those sisters that said they got raped at Duke. He's been cutting his eye teeth on racism since he was a kid out in California. These people have another agenda, and America ain't got nothing to do with it. They're going to hold on to power, and they don't give a damn. My question is, are we going to be smart enough to begin to educate ourselves in a way so that we understand what's really at stake, and we move beyond this appealing to a morality that has never existed in this settler state?
And the question,
Melody to Derrick.
And then what are we really ready to fight for? Right? We are in a crisis, right? Elections matter, yeah, but what are we willing to get in the streets for? Because if we don't get in the streets, this thing is going back to pre-Reconstruction. Everything that we've heard here is, bottom line, it's about, we'll change the census. We're going to put immigration question on there. We think that's not about black people. Understand, the reason we are even number 2 minority is because folks come here from Africa. They come here from the Caribbean. They're shutting that door down as we speak. So we got to get in the streets, like now. Voting, but also protesting. We got the Janice case, and we'll bring that up, labor. If the Supreme Court goes down with that case, labor is going to be decimated. That's us.
That's right.
Those who became black middle class, it's on the backs of the labor movement, right? So if we don't find a way to get really serious about fighting, and at the end of the day, I'd rather go down fighting.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Than chilling like it's okay. It ain't okay.
Come on, man.
You know, I guess for me, I'm less shocked about what's taking place because I live in Mississippi.
Right.
Right? But I'm not saying it perhaps for the reason you think I'm saying it.
Yes, sir.
The only P that matters in this conversation is power. It's not about politics. It's not about party. It's about power.
Come on.
And what I've learned living in Mississippi, power trumps all conversations. It trumps rhetoric, it trumps sermons, it trumps protests. It's raw power. In the essence of it, in a democracy, it is about our vote. Elections have consequences. We would not have this conversation if the outcome was different. We're having this conversation because of the outcome, and that outcome is impacting the federal bench, is impacting education. But if I think about Mississippi, every federal appointment for the 8 years President Obama was in office looked like everybody in this room.
My goodness.
That was about local power.
Right.
So let's not dismiss, well, yeah, we could talk about let's get in the street. No, let's talk about how we leverage us being in the street so we can get to the polls. Because in a democracy, our vote is our currency. Everything else go out the door. And at the end of the day, if we want to protect Haiti, if we want to protect Nigeria or Namibia, we got to control the local politics in the United States.
That's right.
And what's happening in the United States, this country is becoming a country of black and brown and less white, and people are in fear. Therefore, our rules go out the door.
That's right.
And it's important. The point that Melanie was raising earlier about this case, the Janice case that she was referring to, because it's going to be an immediate impact of what the courts are doing, not just a future impact. So this case is important because of what occurred this week 50 years ago. So this week, February 1st, I hope everyone will observe a moment of silence, because 50 years ago, on February 1st, there were two black men so tired from the job they did as garbage collectors in Memphis that they fell asleep in the back of their truck. It malfunctioned, and the truck took them and crushed them. That launched the Memphis sanitation workers' strike. And so please, on February 1st, take a moment of silence. But what prolonged that strike, what the city would not give up on, was a dues checkoff. The Janice case is whether public employees are entitled to have a dues checkoff. The argument before the court is to overturn itself, not on a case from 1950 or from 1880, a very recent case in which the court said, well, a private sector, public sector, this doesn't make a difference. The unions get to bargain. It doesn't matter. The courts want to argue that because they are public sector workers, the very act of saying you're negotiating your wage, oh, that's public policy. That's political speech. So the court is saying that it's different, and they're going to overturn themselves. This is how radical they think, that they aren't going to stand on precedent. And if we're going to have courts that don't believe in recent precedent, then we're going to turn everything upside down, because that means nothing in the law matters. And this case is important because disproportionately, black people are in the public sector. That's where we get a lot of middle-class jobs from. And as Melody said, disproportionately, it's because we are unionized. And so this is an attack on our economic well-being through the courts. And it is a friend that we once relied on as a safeguard, because presumably the courts, as imperfect as they are, Greg's point, America is an ideal, but we were able to appeal to that ideal and appeal to their own words and stand them upside down on their own words and say, look at how illogical you are in your own words. So Thurgood Marshall could win cases because at least they're going to be logical and stand on their own words and their precedent. Now they're telling us in the Janice case, precedent don't mean nothing. We don't care about it.
Before I go to Liz, on February 1st, on Thursday, we will be in Memphis, the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. They actually have their pre-conference, and we'll actually be having all-day sessions dealing with that very issue. Also, we'll have some of those sanitation workers who are still alive. So that's going to be on Thursday. We'll be live streaming that. I'll be doing that town hall Thursday at 7 p.m. From Memphis, and we'll be live streaming that as well on Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope. So you will get a chance to take a look at that. Liz, go ahead.
I think my purpose here today is to provide a different perspective. And I certainly agree that the whitewashing of our federal bench is going to have an immediate and detrimental impact to African Americans. One of the things, I don't personally agree with public sector unions. I think that collective bargaining is already codified in many states and that there are protections for a lot of our public employees. But private sector employees don't have those same protections. So there's a difference of opinion there. But at the end of the day, many of my peers, I think Generation X, I think that's what they call me, and we went to school, our parents were a part of the civil rights movement, and they gave us a strong sense of community. And then we went to school, and we got educated, we got higher education, and then we stopped realizing how much of a struggle our community had. And we're starting to move away from this collective sense of we are all in trouble. And I talked to some people who have a similar background. They may not be as conservative as me. They may be Democrats. They're not paying attention. And it's so important to have these kinds of forums where you can have different perspectives. And listen, Barack Obama said elections have consequences. And so it's not unusual for there to be a change in conservative ideological jurists on the bench. But there is a difference to have such extreme ideological jurists on the bench who have such disgusting statements that have been put on record about gays and black and brown people. That's not normal. That's not what normally happens. And so this conversation tonight tonight is very important. But if we don't keep going out there and keep talking about the issues that impact the African American communities, and if we don't stop talking about parties, we're never going to unify. And so Trump tonight, he's not going to unify the nation. But we can. We can start with our families. We can start with this church tonight, and we can really talk about the issues of income. We can talk about poverty, and we can talk about, I know the revolution is going to be televised. I'm not going to be out there. But I need for me to be able to write a check and be able to support those who are going to be out there. I mean, we don't always agree on the issues, but there's things that we can do. I mean, especially with the NAACP. Like, I don't know that many people I'm in Baltimore. And so I don't know that many people who actually know what our local branch is doing, but you guys are doing so much. And when we were on News One, I learned more and more about the broad impact that you're having in our judicial system. And so I don't know when the conversation stopped occurring across partisan nature, but I think tonight's forum is really, really helpful to educate the masses.
So I'm going to go to a last round of comments because, of course, we have a second panel, and they're chomping at the bit as well. I want to start it this way because I've been asked a lot over the last, I would say, 3 or 4 weeks. And the folks were saying, Roland, what do you think about Oprah 2020? And I kept saying, I don't care about Oprah 2020 because if you are ignoring the fact that Stacey Abrams is running for governor of Georgia, and that primary is in March, if you're ignoring the fact that Andrew Gillum is a brother running for governor of Florida, that primary is in August, if you're ignoring the fact that many of these congressional races, those primaries are going to be, depending upon the state, March, April, or May, or June. If you're focused on what's happening in 2020, you're ignoring the reality of what's happening in these local races. We almost saw the first white mayor in Atlanta in 40 years. That was won by less than 800 votes. You saw, of course, a change of leadership in Birmingham. You saw 25% turnout in St. Louis. You saw less than 20% turnout in the last Detroit mayoral race. And so while so much attention is focused on the congressional midterms, if we ignore the reality of those state rep races and those state senate races, that's where voter suppression has taken off and voter IDs. That's where you've had a lot of attack in terms of what's happening in cities. A lot of people talked about North Carolina and the transgender bathroom bill. What they don't understand is that in that same bill, they prevented the city of Charlotte from setting their own minimum wage. That was in that exact same bill. And so in your final comments, if you want to talk about, obviously, how critical these local and state races are going to be in terms of our future, and then whatever else you wanted to close with in terms of your final comment. And so I will start with Kristen.
So I'm glad that we've all been talking about the power of our votes and how critical it is that we exercise the right to vote. But I think we also have to remember that there is an assault happening right now on minority voting rights, on black voting rights. And this has been part of the Trump agenda, promoting the politics of voter suppression. One of the most dangerous things that Trump did in year one is he launched this so-called Election Integrity Commission. We call it the Sham Voting Commission. And the goal was to try and substantiate his false claims of vote fraud. At the end of the day, to push policies across the country at the local and state level that would have made it harder for African Americans and Latinos and minority communities to vote. Again, illustrating the power of the courts and the power of civil rights lawyers, we filed suit against the Trump administration. And earlier in January, he was forced to sign an executive order dismantling the commission because we brought the full weight of the law down on him. But
could you say something, though, Chris? Could you say something about where it went? It's in Homeland Security now.
That's right. The war is not over. We actually filed suit on Friday against Homeland Security and the Justice Department because we understand that that commission turned over data and information. And we're not going to stand by idly and wait for the Trump administration's next move. We're suing to expose what Homeland Security and DOJ may have afoot now to keep pushing forward the voter suppression agenda. So we have to stay vigilant. And we can play an incredibly important role here, policing what's happening at the local and state level where so many people often are not paying attention. Show up to your local Board of Elections meeting. Find out if they're cleaning up the registration rolls, purging people off the rolls. Find out if they're talking about unnecessary discriminatory photo ID laws, or if they're talking about proof of citizenship requirements for people who want to register to vote, which means that you have to walk around with a birth certificate and attach a copy of that to a voter registration form if you want to register to vote. We stand to play an important role here. I think it's important that we vote, but that we remain vigilant. At the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, we lead a program called Election Protection. It's a nonpartisan voter protection effort. I'm going to ask that you pull out your pen or your phone and write this number down, 866-OUR-VOTE. Integrate that into the work that you're doing in your communities. It's really important that when the problems pop up, that you have a place to go to report them so the lawyers can get on it, file the lawsuits to make sure that we're safeguarding access to the polls at the end of the day.
And you forgot.
And there is a war underway out here, and we are working 7 days a week to fight the Trump administration and all that is happening to turn the clock back on our civil rights. So support civil rights organizations right now. Support the Lawyers Committee, support the NAACP, support Melanie's organization. You can visit the lawyerscommittee.org, hit that donate button, but that is part of resistance. That is part of resistance, supporting the organizations that are out here on the front lines waging war right now. Because tell them, Derrick, it's intense out here.
So I need y'all to understand. The first few times Kristen came on the show, she'd go through all this sort of stuff and wouldn't get a website. I said, Kristen, if you come on the show one more time and don't learn how to ask for money. So I would make her ask for money on radio or television, and so that's why I did that.
And I thank you, Roland, because we need the support now more than ever. Lawyerscommittee.org and hit that donate button. Thank you.
Bill, final comment.
Well, I want to commend you for doing this and for taking advantage of technology, because when we organized the March on Washington in '63, they had a rotodial telephone and index cards, and this current generation needs to know how to use technology in a powerful way, and you're showing that. We want to remember that voting is very important, but there's another side to our society, that's the economy, and the economy is not one person, one vote, it's $1, one vote. The tax bill, which was not bipartisan at all, it passed only with Republican votes because it was the biggest redistribution of money from the public to the private pocketbook. When you move the dollar bill to somebody's pocketbook, you give them the vote in the economy. Why does college tuition go up so fast? Because we have stopped being a middle-income country. When we were a middle-income country, you had to price things for middle-income people. Over half the income in the United States, it's about to be, because of this tax bill, over half the income will be in the top 10%. That's right. $1, one vote. That means the top 10% run the economy because they got all the dollar bill votes. So tuition goes with their income. Housing goes with their income. If I'm going to build a house, it's for people who have money. I don't build a house because you need a house. I build a house because you gave me money to build it. So understand this shift and understand what would happen if I described to you a country in which there's an economic majority that is small and white and a political majority that is black and brown. What did I just describe?
South Africa.
Thank you.
Exactly right.
So this tax bill, in line with what Greg was saying, this tax bill is to make sure that you don't use your democratic rights to say, but America needs roads, America needs schools, America needs public transportation, America needs housing, America needs health care. This is to put the money in private hands and then to argue with you, no, the government doesn't need to do anything. Why? Because the government is us. The government is one person, one vote. That automatically makes it redistributive. So understand what that tax bill was really about. It was to make permanent a regime. So I want us to think about that as the State of the Union, because he's going to tell us the tax bill is great. It's going to make us all wonderful and powerful if you're in the 1% with the money that we just gave the money to.
Melody?
Amen. Right. I think folks just need to get involved, right? So if you have an election, how many people live in Maryland here, right? Governor's race, right? Pay attention, get involved, right? Sister said, write a check. Have so many governor's races going on. If you don't have a governor's race and you got family, we have to get back to that really, really grassroots way of how we turn out that vote. But also equally, because we have to be all things right now, because it's coming always. So we have to pay attention to this budget process that's going to be getting started. Because the president's going to be tweeting all kind of whatever. And the Congress is going to be just lockstep with trying to find a way to pay for those tax cuts. So we have to pay attention to the budget process as it begins. And then there are those of us who got to get in the streets and go to jail, right? And get locked up, right? Have some lawyers around, right? But right? And if you don't do anything else, first of all, you showed up because you know something is way deeply wrong. And black folks, we have that drum beat. And we got to beat that drum and beat that drum every angle that we can. And don't get distracted, and we can't get weary. I look at my 5- and 6-year-old great niece and nephew that stay at my house half of the month, right? Whole other black family experience. But the reality is, and they're gonna get mad at me, right? But that's the truth. That's why I keep doing this. You know, I've been in National Coalition there 23 years, right? I spent years in Atlanta. You know, I'm like, maybe I could just shift and find a way. You know, I would love to just turn it around and step away, but I can't. Right. If we want our children to have half a freaking shot, they're not going to have that shot. Right. With all we've talked about tonight, they're going to have the worst of times. And it's on our watch. Susan tells us we have things to think about. On our watch, what did we do to change this? And in the house of God, we know how we got over. And part of our problem is we've let that go as well.
Liz?
I know that reasonable people can and do disagree, and while I don't necessarily agree with the summation of the Tax Reform Act and how it's going to tear our country apart, I want to leave the audience with these statements, that Donald Trump is not a Republican. He's not conservative. He's not opportunist. And while you may not agree with my positions, or people who are Republican who say that they're conservative, it's so important for us to talk to one another and to educate ourselves. And we can talk all night about statistics to support our notions and our position, but it's so important for everyone to go out there and do a little bit more research. Go to the websites. I'm sure everyone's website has more information, a white paper where you can get more information on it. You can go to my website, urbanconservative.org, and we're a centrist organization for moderates. But I think it's very important that you stand up for yourself, you educate yourself, and you spread the word.
Derrick? You know, as I listen to the panel, I want to thank you, Roland, for pulling this together. Because it is important for us to talk, but it's also important to understand what Donald Trump has done. He's galvanized our energy and focused us in a direction towards resistance.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But we have to be disciplined and outcome-based. We can't get caught in emotionalism.
Right.
We have to be very focused on how do we leverage our collective consciousness towards an outcome that's going to benefit our community. Understanding the political landscape in a way in which some of us have forgot the political landscape. Yes, the courts matter tremendously, but there's no discussion about courts if the policymakers are not in the seats to nominate the bad, to support the bad judges. This year, 88 legislative bodies out of 97, House and Senate, state bodies, are on the ballot.
Yes, sir.
What's at stake?
Yes, sir.
28 states have already signed a constitutional change where they want to rewrite the Constitution. 2/3 it would take to actually call for a constitutional convention.
Yes, sir.
Right? What's on the ballot? Redistricting. The drawing of the political boundaries would impact the elections for the 10 years after that. What's on the ballot? Education budgets. How well we train our children in all 50 states. What's on the ballot? Whether or not we care for our elderly. What's on the ballot? Whether or not we provide support for the disadvantaged. The health of any nation is based on 3 factors. Are we training our young people? Do we care for our elderly? And do we protect the rights of the disadvantaged? It's easy to get caught in emotionalism.
That's right, brother.
It is important that we stay focused on outcomes, and unfortunately for some of us, we don't like it sometimes, it's all about voting. In a democracy, our vote is our currency. So for the NAACP, that's our focus. We are outcome driven. It's a brother that was a former SNCC activist, Willie Riggs, of Mikasa. When you see Willie Riggs or Mikasa, he say, "What's up, Africa?" Right? Y'all, some of y'all know Willie Riggs, right? And then he goes to this diatribe talking about it's nation building time. Y'all, it's nation building time. But we got to build it within the rules that allow us to access power, and that is the vote. So for the NAACP, we're telling people to text your commitment to vote, 40649. NAACP, 40649 NAACP. Why? Because we want to track and identify where do we have the opportunity to get more people to the polls. We would have won Michigan and Donald Trump would have lost had 28,000 black folks in Detroit who voted, but they skipped the top of the ticket and he won Michigan by 8,000 votes. That's serious. We have power. 40649 NAACP. Thank you, Roland, for having this conversation.
Greg Carr.
Yeah, thank you, Roland. And I know this is just the beginning, and I'll be tuned in on the 1st of February for sure. You know, Brother Derrick is right. We've got to do that. And Liz, I agree with you. Donald Trump's not a Republican. But here's something else. Neither is Devin Nunes. Neither is Mitch McConnell. And here's something else. They're not Americans. If they were Americans, they wouldn't be abetting the Russians and what they've done over the last few days. Now, that don't mean we're Americans either. Now, let's be clear. That's another conversation for another day. But what I'm saying is they don't have a country that involves you. They are wholly owned subsidiaries of billionaires whose finance capital is international. And so you're absolutely right. What we have to do now is, like everyone has been saying, we got to be smart now. A recent ancestor made his transition last week, Wyatt T. Walker, right? Operation C, Birmingham, confrontation. It's the vote, it's the streets, it's all in one place, and we don't apologize to anybody and stop pretending like these people and us believe the same thing. Anytime, no, I'm very serious. Finally, Bill, you can't underscore it enough, brother. The $1.5 trillion tax cut was part 1. Part 2 is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Welfare reform. They have a philosophy of society that says if you're sick, if you're old, if you're black or brown, which is the majority of the world, if you're poor, you just go and die. Or better yet, we'll pay ourselves to guard you when we lock your ass up behind these new rules. I would say ass, but I hate to say it that way, but finally I'll say this with Wallace Charles Smith looking at me. I remember from Nashville, brother, when you were at First Baptist Church, Capitol Hill, following in the footsteps of the great Kelly Miller Smith. In the words of Martin Luther King, it's never a convenient time to stand for right. And Roland, how many times did you say this on your show, brother? And I promise you, in this new platform, Roland's Book Club got to be following on that. That last book Dr. King wrote, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. We should put that in the hands of every child under 12 years old and sit and read it with them because we got to do something different. Thank you, brother, for hosting us.
Give it up for our first panel. Liz Copeland, Bill Spriggs, Derrick Johnson, Greg Carr, Kristen Clarke, and Melanie Campbell. All right, folks, so we're going to do a panel switch, but
y'all heard Derrick talking about, y'all go take your seats. I heard Derrick talking about the NAACP number, and so phone to action there in the back here. So I'm going to go back here, and so the camera's going to follow me back here, so I want to show you this. And so this microphone here working? Testing one. There we go. All right, here we go. All right, so first of all, so tell everybody who you are and what is Phone to Action?
Sure. So my name is Martin Griffin. We're with Phone to Action. Phone to Action is a grassroots advocacy company. We help organizations like the NAACP mobilize their supporters to engage in civic action. So tonight, what we are doing is we're encouraging everybody in this room, everybody watching online, to take out your phones and text the word NAACP to the number 40649. And you can join with thousands of people around the country to pledge to vote.
So what happens here? So every person who texts, all of a sudden they're popping up
exactly.
on the map here?
Everybody who texts NAACP to 40649, when you do that, a pin will drop down with your location. You saw one just pop down right there. And the number will, your name, your first name will appear as an advocate pledging to vote. And you will be receiving notifications throughout the year showing where, when, and how you can vote and reminders for how to vote.
A lot of people also forget about a lot of their local elections. And so this is also reminding them you got a primary coming up. And what, a city race, county race coming up?
Exactly. It's 2018.
Obviously, y'all out in the room with people on social media, they're doing it because these pins are dropping all over the country. And also you have a sense of where all of us are. Ain't that many of us out west.
Keep them coming.
So everybody in California, Washington State, y'all need to get on it so y'all can drop. So the local races, you'll get that update as well on your phone.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, cool.
All right, thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
Text NAACP to 40649.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. All right, give a round of applause for Phone to Action, y'all. All right, I want to, of course, so we did this here because we wanted to have, we had lots of folks, lots of different comments, a lot of things they wanted to say. We also had different perspectives in different groups as well, and so I split this up purposely to give us, again, a unique perspective and to have a different conversation because what happens is a lot of people say, well, who gets left off, who you need to have on, and so folks were texting me, why didn't you call me? I was like, calm down, it's the first one we're doing. I'm going to work everybody else in, don't worry about it, so calm down. So I want you to do that. So let me introduce our panel here on the end there. Of course, she was one of the regulars on TV One's News One Now. Tiffany Loftin, she is a human and labor rights organizer. Give it up for Tiffany, please. Dayvon Love out of Baltimore, Director of Research and Public Policy for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle.
Yeah.
His microphone not on, so y'all messed that up. I wanted him to say it. Y'all messed that thing up. So come on, it's a mic. Go ahead and tell them again so they can hear you.
Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle.
Okay, is the mic low or is it he just talking like he Barry White? Which one is it?
Both.
Well, we can hear. We know Tiffany microphone work. We know her microphone work. My bad. You know I'm always got to mess with her. Also, we have Simone. Okay, pronounce your last name.
Yhap.
Simone Yhap, student at Howard University. Student at Howard University.
Thank you.
It's spelled Y-H-A-P. I wasn't gonna mess that thing up. So you know how some folks get a little special. Also, we have on the panel Josecline Garcia. She is president of the United States Student Association. Tiffany used to be president of the group as well when she was actually a student.
And now you're foundation board chair, yeah.
And we have Eugene Craig, of course, Eugene Craig organization, Republican out of Maryland. Give it up for Eugene. So I call this the millennial panel. That's what I called it. And so while we are talking, Jay, go live to the chamber there. Of course, you got members of the cabinet who are coming in a moment. Trump will be walking in. We have that shot. Do we have it up? Now, let me also explain to you the Congressional Black Caucus. If you see tonight's broadcast, they will all be wearing kente cloth ties as well as lapel items. And so there was lots of conversation over the last 2 weeks. What should the CBC do as a group? Should they boycott? Should they walk out? of his speech as soon as he says, hello, my fellow Americans. And so that's one of the things that you'll see tonight. Of course, there are members who have said they will not be attending. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Congressman John Lewis, Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. I know Congresswoman Karen Bass said she was thinking about it as well. And so I'll be texting some CBC members in a moment to find out exactly how many members. There were upwards of 15 or so who said they were not going to participate in tonight's State of the Union. And so we are monitoring that as well. We got someone also monitoring it just in case, something else happens if you have groups walk out. Also, I believe a number of women are wearing black tonight to the State of the Union to protest, of course, sexual harassment on Capitol Hill as well. And so we are paying attention to all of that. So let me go back to my panel. Anyone can jump in. I'm going to throw the question out, not pointing to anybody in particular. When we look at the last election, the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, they did the polling data showing who was most likely going to vote among African Americans, who was least likely going to vote among African Americans. And the highest number in terms of who said, I'm absolutely going to vote, were those African Americans who were 60 plus. The highest number who said they were not interested in the election were those who were 34 and under. We now are in a place where the millennial generation, and so is it, my niece was trying to tell me, what do they call themselves, Gen Y, Gen Z, because they didn't want to be called millennials. I'm like, okay, whatever y'all are. So the millennial generation is now larger than baby boomers. And so when we talk about voting power, are we seeing a generation who says, wait a minute, you know what? We saw what happened in 2016. We can't take anything for granted. We've got to mobilize and organize. Your assessment of what you're seeing and what you're hearing.
I think a part of what we see, because I think it's really complicated, I think a part of the problem that a lot of millennials who are in politics are socialized to do is we have a fundamental misunderstanding of power. Too often, many of us think power is your proximity to white corporate spaces, mainstream political establishment institutions. And oftentimes what that means is that, if you're young, you start off in the Young Democrats, then you work for a staffer, then, you might work for a labor union, then you might work on a campaign, and then that is your pathway to political office. The problem is that that workflow doesn't require you to immerse yourself in the communities most directly impacted by the things that, by the system of racism and white supremacy that organizes the political structure of our society. The reason why that's so important is because a lot of times there's a bifurcation between national politics and local politics. And I think a lot of what we see in terms of turnout, when you look at the Democrats, establishment Democrats on the local level, they actually discourage increased voter turnout. And the reason for that is because increased voter turnout messes up the math for the incumbents that protect the establishment Democrats on the local level. So that's a big part of the reason why a lot of young folks don't participate in the process, and black poor folks in general, in terms of lack of participation in the process, happens because many of the local elected officials do not build the infrastructure, do not have rhetoric, do not put forward policies that most directly impact the masses of black people. And so my hope is that this moment helps us to realize that we have to understand power, and one of the impacts of white supremacy is that we experience this kind of ego starvation that our picture on a flyer, or our name in a publication, or a picture with a very prominent elected official, we psychologically have conditioned to see that as power. And so my hope is that we can take the lesson from 2016 and understand that if we're serious about building the kind of infrastructure that can not make us just appendages of the Democratic Party, but make us equal participants in how policy is operating in our own communities, both locally and nationally. And the Democratic Party establishment is afraid of that. They're afraid of authentic grassroots empowerment because it undermines the establishment's ability to maintain their power. So my hope is that we don't make the mistake of seeing power as seeing our faces places and being connected to people with names that people recognize.
In fact, we saw that in Birmingham. William Bell was the incumbent mayor. And then what happened was he was running against an incumbent, a younger candidate. He raised a lot of his money through his Morehouse graduates, and he focused on grassroots and mobilizing younger voters, beat him in the general, went to the runoff and beat him in the runoff, because, again, he mobilized a group other folks were ignoring. Anybody, go ahead.
Well, I actually agree with Dayvon. It's not just a Democratic issue, it's a Republican issue. We experienced, higher turnout and wiping out of a lot of incumbents in 2020 with the Tea Party movement. But to address your question of millennial voting, it's an issue of having a reason to vote. And I think a lot of folks this last cycle felt as though their vote didn't count, and so they sat out. And 2008 and 2012, they felt like their vote counted, so they came out and vote. And for our generation, we got to experience the euphoric years of Barack Obama, of having the first black president, of having a young president, X, Y, and Z. And so for us, fear isn't a natural motivator, as it may be for other generations, older generations that have traditionally been marketed to. So the fear of a Donald Trump, one, most folk probably didn't take him seriously as a candidate. I didn't as a Republican. I voted against him twice. But the thing is that for our generation, fear doesn't work. And so you have to give us a reason to vote. And so, Bernie was a reason for a lot of folk. Once the Democrats screwed over Bernie, a lot of folks said, hey, I'm out. When it came down to Hillary and Trump, they said, hey, why am I going to vote for the better of two evils? And so you had a lot of folks, go Stein or Johnson or Evan McMullen. So,
go ahead.
Is my mic on?
Go ahead.
Okay, good. You might have to turn it down because I talk loud. Roland, a lot of folks felt like betrayed and backstabbed in the last primary election when we saw that, because you're right. And I was the one who voted for Bernie also, and then I voted for Jill Stein. We were talking about folks who were definitely involved in the process and that thought that even though there was an old white man running, which I know there's a narrative that the progressive movement has painted, that we can't vote for nobody that's a white man anymore, which we can debate later, but the issue that there was a progressive white man who cared about student debt, who cared about education, who cared about racial justice, who cared about all these things, not win the primary, folks did not only feel like there was a lesser of the two evils, which we hear every year, that's not a new thing, but they also felt like, okay, if we can't vote for him and they screwed us over for that particular candidate, we're not going to participate in the process because our voices are not heard. And so what we're seeing now, especially with the backlash that we knew was going to come, what we're seeing now is folks are not just saying, how do I make sure I show up to the poll? How do I make sure I join an organization whose values match mine and make sure that they're supporting and endorsing the right candidate? Because that was also an issue, was the last cycle of elections. A lot of the organizations weren't even supporting Bernie Sanders either, and they were silent until Hillary came out, and then they wanted to support Hillary, and all the organizations that had members were like, wait a minute, this is not who I wanted you to endorse or vote for. Now what we're seeing is young people saying, instead of just showing up to the polls and supporting the infrastructure of progressiveness, and I agree with Dayvon also, it's not just that folks don't want leadership to lose power, it's also that they just don't want to do it in the first place because they like and they're comfortable where they're at. We're seeing young people run for office. We're seeing young people support other young people to run for office. We're seeing young people form coalitions and caucuses and spaces to take over those institutions. And the fight in our own movement, however people define left, right, liberal, progressive, whatever, our fight within ourselves right now is really, really, really real and really, really, really difficult because it's a generational struggle. It's a colorism struggle. There is a voice struggle. There's an ideological struggle. And what's going to happen is one or two things. We're going to keep fighting ourselves, and we're not going to make space for young people to take over. We're going to keep telling young people they aren't good enough, or they're not smart enough, or they don't have the historical knowledge of the background. And we're going to continue to scare them away and push them away, and they're not going to want to be involved. Or people are going to collaborate for real and move out the way so that we can have a collective space that has both the new millennium ideas, the new millennium talents, the new millennium representation, and the historical wisdom and the knowledge that took place when folks who've been in organizations for over 60 years. Let me tell you really quick, Roland, because I just had a conversation with him about this really quickly. We have Congress members and all these folks who have been in office and serving for over 50, 60 years. Let me tell you something. I don't care. Look for me in 60 years. I'm going to be in the Maldives, on the beach, with a drink, chilling in my bikini, and that's it. I'm not going to keep working because we have to realize that at a certain point, we have to pass the baton, and we're not passing the baton.
What's interesting is I had a conversation with a young lady. She was in North Carolina, early 20s, and she said, I'm not interested in voting for anybody in the presidential race. And she said, so I'm just going to focus on state issues. I said, okay. I said, what are you particularly interested about? She says, criminal justice reform is one of the, I said, now, you do know the president plays a role in criminal justice reform. I said, you do know who appoints those federal judges. You do know who picks the attorney general. You do know who will make a determination whether we utilize private prisons or not. And then she talked about a lot of her fellow students having student loan debt. I said, now, you do know the president will be picking who's the Secretary of Education and will be determining Pell Grants and things along those lines. And literally every issue, she brought up about 5 of them to me. Every single one of those issues had a federal component. And she finally said, so you're telling me I can't just ignore the top of the ticket? I said, you can't. I said, no matter how angry you might feel, no matter how mad you might be that, well, my candidate didn't get a shot or didn't win, I said, let me be clear. One of these 2 people will win. And your life will be impacted one way or the other. And she was to your point, grappling with that. And I think there were a lot of people, to your point, who said, okay, I'm going to go to this protest thing. He's not going to win, which means somebody else is going to do the job. Then they woke up Wednesday morning and went, oh my God, what just happened? And because there was a lot of that was going on. And now I think this groundswell of reaction is because people woke up and said, whoa, that actually happened, which meant me sitting it out meant you now are seeing the results of when we sit out even one election, how it could change everything. Many said out of the 23rd midterm elections, 16 legislatures flipped, voter ID was passed left and right. Then people said, oh my God, now what happened? And so how are you trying to get people to understand, Jocelyn, I'm going to start with you, to get people to understand that no matter how you feel, you got to be in this game. At every level, even at one point if you're disappointed, you can't check out because somebody will win.
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Buenos tardes. And thank you all so much for having me in this space. I was actually about to touch on that. And I think the gap between the millennial generation is that in 2008 and in 2012, there was a lot of Obama, he was idolized in the election. You know, he was seen as a savior. And the reality is that these politicians and these candidates are not our savior at all. You know, they are resources for our communities, and you want to elect the person that's going to give you most access to your communities to be able to uplift your issues and then better our social mobility in our lives, right? And so what we saw within the millennials is, you know, they didn't have, that's what they were taught. They were taught to idolize candidates. And when they were put in a position between Hillary and Trump and, you know, they don't want either of the candidates, you know, it was very easy to forget about how you use these people as tools and resources. And so I do believe that that understanding has become more clear to the millennial generation, where people are realizing that we can't just make it about the person, we can't idolize them, we have to make it about the issues constantly, and who's going to be the person that's going to give us most resources to uplift it. But I've definitely seen that transition happen most now, so I'm optimistic about the midterm and the next presidential election.
With everything that she's saying, especially on the topic of idealization. However, we must not forget to include understanding of the political process and the political structure. By understanding how the different branches work, and also the significance of the midterms election, the significance of your local state senator or your local representative, you are the person, your vote matters. You impact the decisions that are made, how they vote. Once you elect them, that's the first step of the process. Now it goes lobbying them for certain causes that are important to your community. And also want to touch on a point that you said earlier about not voting. You have to remember, those that were alive during the Obama era, they were very young. Like myself, I was in middle school during the Obama era for a majority of it. And then the Obama era came to an end during my freshman year of college. I turned 18 my sophomore year of college, and that was my opportunity to vote. I casted my first vote for the very first time last year during the presidential election. So those that had the opportunity to cast a vote, they did, especially at Howard University, because we went out in droves. We literally registered to vote, same day, went to our Office of Residence Life to get papers saying we are DC residents because we attend Howard University. And then we also have to analyze what polling sites are available in our communities. We all had to go to one school across the street from one of our dormitories, and we were there throughout the entire night, standing in line for 3 hours to cast a vote. And no one discusses these issues. So let's talk about the places that are available in our community, even in southern states. Why is it that you have to go to the DMV to get a license and able to vote, and the nearest DMVs are closed down? You have to take a 1-hour bus ride in order to get that. Are you not realizing the issues that are plaguing our community, and what are your representatives doing to change these issues? Reach out to your local representatives. Tell them, this is the issue of my community. I elected you. What are you doing to change this? My vote matters. So show me that it does so you can get reelected and show that you actually are a change agent. If not, we will choose someone else that is.
So I want to say something that and this actually might not be popular.
I'm used to that.
You know, I think a part of the issue of the impact of voting and looking at the national level, it's not just a question of participation, it's a question of the nature of our participation that I think is really important. Maryland is actually a very interesting case study to this end because we have a Republican governor, the second time in 50 years, with a democratically controlled legislature. We had Martin O'Malley as governor for 2 terms, for 8 years. And we couldn't get really meaningful criminal justice reform during his tenure as governor. He's a Democrat. Since then, so his lieutenant governor ran for governor in 2014, lost. People were dissatisfied with Martin O'Malley, got this kind of moderate Republican elected. Since this Republican has been elected, we've had the Justice Reinvestment Act and reducing the prison population in the state of Maryland. Just overrode a veto that the governor put on a ban-the-box on college applications that some of our partners worked on. Expansive issues around expungement, so reducing the barriers to employment. 40,000 people who were returning citizens were given the right to vote upon release, right? Again, another veto override. The reason why I bring this up is because what I feel like I'm observing in Maryland as a case study is that because Democrats could not just count on a black electorate to show up, Democrats are forced to behave more in the interest of black people. And I get concerned when we talk generally about just participation on the national level, because I think sometimes we overstate the impact that having certain Democrats in elected office has on black people. Right, so it's convenient for Democrats to talk about anti-poverty. They won't talk about black wealth creation, right? They'll talk about, democracy, but they won't talk about putting black people in control of major institutions that govern civil society, right? They won't hire black staff, right, to create a pipeline for leadership that can preside over the institutions that govern. So I want us to be very careful that when we talk about participation and voting on the national level, we cannot continue to allow ourselves to participate in an exploitative relationship with the Democrats and expect the masses of black people to feel like that's changed, because there are a few of us that are able to benefit from democratic policies, but the masses of when you talk to people who are social workers, people who provide direct services to black folks on the ground, for them, this catastrophe that we're talking about, they don't see the difference in many cases. And we have to address that. We can't dismiss that as people not being politically savvy. We actually have to embrace a politics that understands that the way we participate is just as important as our actual participation.
But is this, Tiffany, I want you to jump in this, but is this also because, and I'll juxtapose Hogan being governor, being Republican, to Obama being president? Is it also because we will be far more vigilant in pressing a Republican governor to do something versus, if we really want to be honest, we lay back and said, no, brother got too much on his plate, we don't want to say anything, and so we're not as vigilant in terms of challenging a Democrat who is in power. I keep making the point that the election is the end of one process, it's the beginning of another. You got to put that pressure on them to say, no, you are going to step up and do what's right after you get in. not we're just going to wait back and see what you do. Tiffany.
Yeah, that goes back to what Josecline was saying earlier about this whole savior complex situation. And it might not be as black and white as a savior complex, but it is the relaxation of, well, they're on our side somehow, which I just like. For folks who actually do organizing on the ground across the country and go to communities and talk to students at school or talk in your families at the dinner table and talk to your kids, they don't understand the conversation we're having now, to the complexities and to the depth of of how we're having this conversation. And so when we say Democrat versus Republican, it's a bipartisan feeling that you get because you're triggered by Republican, you're triggered by white man, you're triggered by white supremacy, you're triggered by those words. And it has become sort of a popularity thing as opposed to understand for yourself, what side do you really stand on? I have not been and am no longer a fan of the Democratic Party. Have not been. I'm not a Republican. I'm never going over there. But never going over there. Never going over there. But this black and white box that we put people in, it's to the point that the president of the NAACP said earlier. This is about power. And so when we actually talk, this is what you said it, and you said this might be unpopular. I'm going to say what might be more unpopular just to answer your unpopular comment. I am ready for us to stop judging and fighting each other because of political names and titles and boxes, and for us to form our own thing. There is no, and it's unpopular, but I asked Auntie Maxine this on the panel on TV, Roland, when we sat with her, and she said, I want black women to create political clubs. And I said, yes, I get that. We have to, I am a super advocate for voting. I have been for the last decade. Don't worry about how old I am. I am for the last decade. I've been doing voter registration work for a decade, literally at the age that I am now. And I want us to focus on how do we do the education for where your values are, how policy works, what policy hurts our community, who is in office that is not on our side, run for office ourselves, and not worry about painting the picture of Democrat versus Republican. Real quick, you had people, I'm a labor organizer. Real quick, I'm a labor organizer. I called people in Pennsylvania who voted for Bernie Sanders and then voted for Donald Trump. What color are they? They're not Republican, they're not blue, they're not red, they're somewhere purple, blue in the middle. I don't understand how people keep polarizing us like this because if we continue to do that, it's not going to work, Roland. We need our own party.
Because here's why. But see, follow me. I already see some people saying, oh my God, you're nuts, your own party. No. It's not even a question of your own party. It's really your own interest. So I'll give you an example.
They don't fit in either box.
No, actually, no, they do. Here's what I mean.
Depends on who you are.
No, when Dayvon just laid out, what he just laid out is there are individuals who likely call themselves Democrats, or they might lean Democrat, but what they said is, these issues matter to me. So since you won and not the person who I wanted, I'm going to still hold you up and jack you up to get what I need.
Yeah.
He then does it. In 2012, a major civil rights leader told me point blank, Roland, we get more cooperation and support from Republican governors on criminal justice reform than we're getting from Democratic governors. But here's what happens. There's this block for us because we then go, okay, I don't want nobody to know that I'm doing that. It's just like I've been having these battles with people over school choice. I'm not, no, but the deal is, I ain't debating whether our kids have a shot at education. People say, well, that's a conservative idea. I'm like, no, it's not. Getting an education is education. If a traditional school works, I'm good with it. Private, I'm good with it. Magnet, I'm cool. Homeschool, charter school, online school, technical school. If it works, rolling good. But I'm not going to fall into the boat of, well, if you support that, that Republican governor also supports it. And I said, I will say, good for you. And I'm going to kick your butt on voter suppression. And I'm going to kick your butt on civil rights. And I'm going to kick your butt on police reform. But if I agree with you on one, that's my issue. And I think if we begin to drive our issues,
rather than the colors of the party,
all of a sudden, Democrats might have to pay a lot more attention, and Republicans, because it comes down to what's our issue, because we can't check out if our person doesn't win, we're still constituents.
I think to think to Tiffany's point, it's really important to understand that we need political infrastructure. One of the things that really frustrates me is that there are a lot of friends of mine that have run for political office, that are in political office, and they always say, Dayvon, why don't you support me? I can't say that super black stuff now, but when I get in, I'm going to be super black. And one of the frustrating things
We've
about
heard that before.
Right, and one of the frustrating things about that is that what people don't realize is that if your political infrastructure exists outside of your community, that ultimately you're beholden to the community that your infrastructure belongs to.
Precisely.
Your ability to get out votes, your ability to raise money, your ability to have a PR apparatus. And too often, I think there's this thinking that if I'm an individually smart person, I can go into elected office and make a difference. And I think, unfortunately, the discourses around our participation in the Democratic Party really centers around us agreeing to a coalition that puts us last, right? Instead of building an infrastructure that we own, control, and operate so that we can choose who we talk to. It shouldn't be a crime to talk to a Republican if that Republican is going to get us our interests.
If you are in office, we are still constituents.
Right.
It doesn't matter. And that to me, I think, and that's the conversation I've had with folks, Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, their deal is, no, what's the issue? I'm not getting hung up in your labels. I'm all about in terms of what is the issue. And look, you're going to still have to make a decision. But also we talk about infrastructure. And Jocelyn, I want you to speak to this with the head of the United Student Association. DeWanna Thompson, one of the young sister who was in Alabama. They had wokevote.us. And when I put them on the show, she called me and she said, she said, man, the energy that we got from that because we got a platform, we were able to talk. CNN didn't put them on. MSNBC didn't put them on. And they called them after Doug Jones won to find out how they did it. I put them on before he won. Put them on, and on Tom Joyner, because if, to your point, if we aren't putting the infrastructure together, we're not waiting on some candidate or party. And so now when the candidate comes, we say, well, here's our infrastructure. Now you know what's going to happen if you win. We're going to ride your behind to do this. And that candidate will be afraid of that infrastructure because he or she saw the power of them getting elected. They might have to see the power of them losing next time around. Speak to the infrastructure that Dayvon was talking about.
Yeah. I think that also goes into the point that you had made earlier about making it accessible and easy for students to be able to vote. Again, it has to do with that infrastructure. And speaking from the student perspective, food insecurity and housing insecurity is a very real problem. And it's also not an accident that it is black and brown students who are predominantly in those issues facing food and housing insecurity. When I speak to students and when I'm organizing with them, and I'm telling them like, hey, are you gonna run a voter registration campaign? Are you gonna go out and vote? They're telling me I have to work. I need to put food on my table. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make rent. Like I don't have time to run this campaign. And what I've noticed is that the students who are running these campaigns are predominantly white students. And again, I don't think that is an accident because organizing at times it is a privilege. And our education institutions, one of the state of students right now, since we're talking about the state of our union, is that, education is being threatened and student safety and their basic needs are being threatened. Again, that has to do with food, housing, and also mental health. And so I think it is important to create the infrastructure to ensure that it's sustainable, make it easy for students to be able to vote. And I think that has to do with changing a lot of things within the institution. I think we need to uplift our black and brown communities, ensure that they are empowered and know that they do have the ability to vote. But again, that also has to do with changing the way our current educational institution is right now so that these students don't have to miss their chance to vote because they're working 3 jobs. They're able to voice their opinion because their professors are not holding class when the voting polls are taking place, or when their university administrations are working with student organizers to be able to have polling places on their campuses, are giving them resources as well. And in terms of infrastructure, another point is people not only us, we have a responsibility, our universities and also our governments, we need to ensure that it stays sustainable because there is a lot of power within that. And there have been states where there was very powerful institutions, perhaps not voting ones, but there were powerful statewide student institutions, particularly in Arizona and Wisconsin. And when these students, they were registering a lot of people to vote, their state governments saw them as a threat. And what they did was pass state policies that would prevent those statewide student associations from collecting student fees, which then remove their student fee autonomy, remove the funding of these statewide student organizations, which again, provided political infrastructure. And what that created is that it removed their voting power and their right to organize. So, with creating infrastructure, that's important one, but also creating the means to be able to sustain that infrastructure, to continue growing and being passed down to future generations.
Eugene? I could talk about the benefits of infrastructure. Part of the issue you're seeing in Congress right now is a result of infrastructure being built out. So three cycles. Let's go back to 2010. 2010 happens, and you see a complete uproar in the Republican Party. You see the rise of the Tea Party. You see the typical establishment wing. They're scared to death. And what you see is a ton of embattled primaries across the country. And I mean, you saw 30, 40 incumbents just knocked off. And it was knocked by new infrastructure developed, by people coming together and saying, hey, we're going to fund candidates that support our issues. And that time was, tax reform and Obamacare. We're going to, build out organizations that are going to train activists and educate people. And then thirdly, we're going to make sure that we're driving people to the polls in Republican primaries. And what you saw the rise of the Tea Party wave, which then took us to 2014, we took the Senate, and was very successful. But part of the obstruction that Barack Obama dealt with was a result of the infrastructure that was built in 2010. It was hey, I work with this Democrat, or hey, I don't take this particular position on this issue. I'm going to be voted out. I'm going to be chastised. I'm going to be dealt with. And so I agree 100% on building infrastructure, especially locally. The Tea Party clubs in 2010 was where all the energy was. Yeah, there was a lot of big money at the top, but it was, the mom and dad that got upset by talk radio that said, hey, I'm going to do something. And I think that's where we are right now as Black Americans. We're at that point where, hey, we're going to do something.
Well, first of all, you're right. But you did have a lot of energy on the base. But the reality is, I don't care who you are, it still is enormously helpful when you have these networks pouring. The Koch brothers already announced they're going to pour their network, just their network, will be pouring $400 million into the midterm elections.
Yeah. Now,
it was another sister, Latasha. Was it Latasha Brown in Alabama? They raised about $2.5 million. Again, you had that going on. You had Woke Vote. Tom Steyer has announced that he's going to spend $30 million in this cycle, specifically to drive young voters as well. Are any of you seeing the resources of folks who are saying, okay, rhetoric is one thing, but resources are another? Because to your point, yeah, there's a lot of white kids. They got trust funds, or they got folks who are paying their bills. Ain't that many black kids and brown kids can go to a place and say, look, I'm not gonna get paid for 6-9 months for the experience.
Can I jump in for a second? That's a huge issue. You want to talk about, let's talk about rail power, let's talk about pipelines. You want to talk about Congress right now? One of the reasons we don't have as many senior black staffers on the Senate side, and most of your black staffers are serving CBC members, is because of that issue. It costs to live in this town. It costs to work in this town. And to not be paid and not have the resources around you, it puts us at a disadvantage. I say as a Republican, I tell my guys all the time, look, hire us. I own a consulting firm. You want us to hire us, and don't give us the minority contract. Give us the full contract.
And that's how Robbie Mook. That's how Robbie Mook can be 36 years old and be the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton, because you were working for free on his campaigns when you got to meet so and so. There's some black folks like, say, dog, I can't be working 2 or 3 years for no money. That's just not going to work.
Paul Ryan, 25 years, goes from parking cars at the Capitol Hill Club to Speaker in the House.
And here's the other thing. Unfortunately, a lot of the issues that impact black folks, many of us are relying on foundations, philanthropy. We're relying on grants. So there's a different workflow, right? Because a lot of folks who work for, 501c3 organizations, not all, but many, they don't even think about the importance of building the kind of entrepreneurial workflow that they can sustain and finance their own political infrastructure. So a part of it is a change in mentality. Again, like I was saying before, Democrats talk a lot about anti-poverty, but that gives strategic advantage to a pipeline, particularly of white folks, white progressives in the Democratic Party, to have their pipelines without a conversation about investment in the kinds of institutions that our communities own, control, and operate to produce that pipeline. And so I think it's about changing that mentality so that we're not just thinking charity when we think about black folks' issues, but we're thinking about institution building so that we can stand on equal footing in civil society.
Let me ask you this question really quick. Go ahead, sis.
Thank you. I have to counterpoint you said about 501c3s, because I personally work with a 501c3, the Family on 3 Foundation, and I have a direct insight about the interworkings of foundations. It's not like we don't go and do the grant writing and having to do this personally, but it's about the education. Do you know how to write grants if you just start founding a foundation without having to outsource and then pay for that out-of-pocket cost, especially when beginning that foundation and having to grassroots everything? If you don't know how to do that, then you're automatically set for failure, and you have so many roadblocks that you have to overcome. So it's not about the charity aspect. It's about the education of knowing how to get the money that can help assist you in your endeavors.
Tiffany, go ahead.
So it's really important because I don't know how many folks in here, I live here in D.C., I probably get 2 fundraising emails a day, and especially after all the crazy stuff that's happening with immigration and so on and so forth, there is always an email that we get to fundraising to ask. But let me ask the people here in this room, how many of you are actually dues-paying member to an organization? Raise your hand. That's not enough. That's not enough. And I'm looking at a lot of the and I'm just judging by how old you look. I'm looking at more of the seasoned folks. A lot of the young folks are not paying membership dues to organizations. We don't belong to a union. For several reasons. We're not paying membership dues to a civil rights organization. We have those we're not paying tithes at church. I don't know what church you go to. I don't know what church you go to. I'm not advocating for tithes for the Lord. I'm advocating tithes because my church does political work. My church does political organizing. My church, Shiloh Baptist Church, and my church has a political ministry, and we do voter registration. 6,000 members, all of them registered to vote, and they all go out and vote at the polls. And so how many of us are actually participating and voting and then supporting and donating to people's individual campaigns? Everybody that's a black woman that I've spoken to that's running for office, Roland, I've gone through and said, okay, you might not be in the town or the city that I'm in, but how can I support with your campaign? Because I can't come down there. They said, donate $5. All right, well, I can't get a Starbucks hot chocolate, so I'm going to give you the $5 for today. That means if we continue to think like that and build like that and move like that, the infrastructure that we already created and that we already have over years will work, but we don't do that.
Final round of comments here. Go right ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Another type of infrastructure that I think is really important is the infrastructure that is within our families and the relationship between loved ones, like parents and students, speaking from the student perspective. I know that a lot of student organizers right now, organizing is not easy. It is often very dangerous and also triggering, but also very important. And when I speak to students, and also speaking from my own experience, often their loved ones or their parents, don't support the organizing efforts. And, that gets to you. I know that when I was a student organizer, my parents, I'd go out to protests or I'd go out to conferences, I'd be super involved. My parents would tell me, why are you wasting your time doing this? You can't actually make an impact or a change. Go to your room and study, get that GPA. Instead of telling me you know what, you go do that. I see you out there in the streets. It hasn't been until maybe 6 years now that they have become very supportive. And you know what, I don't blame them for that. My parents were immigrants from Mexico and Guatemala, and they have been really punched by this system and by these institutions where I don't blame them for not believing in the impact of change anymore. However, I have noticed that they have come around, and I think that it's important, especially for the folks who have children, to support your children, to support them when they're students, and tell them, you do have the power to go change. How can I help you? Instead of saying, you can't do it. And I think that family support and that love support is extremely vital because it is hard to be a student. It is hard to be in this institution that was not made for you, and it is hard to go day by day on this and struggling to uplift your community when your loved ones are not there by your side.
Simone?
I absolutely agree with her points and as well as hers, because there are two important things I want to touch on. One, support. Support does not only equate to monetary donations. It can be working with your local NAACP chapter. I know at Howard...
Or taking it over.
Exactly, that too. Run for an executive board position. Run for a chair position. Get out in the streets and work. I know during the presidential election, we had Howard students that weren't even a part of the NAACP on the phone lines tallying voter suppression in different southern states and writing those reports and submitting those to other different entities that can help support and also provide lawyers in order to fix this issue and help create the reports to report this. So this is just the kind of grassroots networking that needs to take place. Secondly, if we're discussing infrastructure, let's discuss the foundation. The foundation is broken. You cannot build upon anything that's broken. If you do, it's going to collapse. So a lot of the things that the levels that we have achieved to, we have to look at the ones that are below. Are the ones below failing us? And if not, how are we going to correct those? And let's rework to tighten the foundation in order to successfully build.
Eugene?
Well, I'll close with this. Answer your question from earlier panel. Donald Trump is uniting us. He's uniting us to defeat him in 2020, either by primary or by general election. Infrastructure is major. I think a big part of the infrastructure is supporting black media. Without Roland, this would not have happened. Nobody else is doing this. Not MSNBC, not BET, not CNN, not Fox News. And thirdly, we don't have permanent parties, but we do have permanent issues and permanent things that matter to us.
Dayvon?
If we don't own, control, and operate it, it's not ours. And I think we have to get ourselves to a place where we understand the importance of building institutions so that we can participate in a way where we're not being exploited by the Democratic Party, because it is only that when the masses of black folks will see the benefit of engaging in the political process. The last thing I'll say is that one of the things that is going to be very important for us to acknowledge, black people, people of color give away lots of intellectual property and labor for free. We don't properly monetize, right, and provide value to the work that we do. And unfortunately, that creates a dynamic where we're reliant, right, on the foundation community, on the nonprofit industrial complex. We're reliant, right, on having to focus on, writing grants, site visits, relationships with program officers. And that trades off with the work that's necessary to producing intellectual property that can help finance your institution so that you don't have to ask for money and those foundation dollars are extra. So it's really important that we begin to monetize the labor and intellectual property that we have and stop giving it away for free for hope that we can be accepted into a coalition that has been proven to fail us time and time again.
See, Dayvon speaking my language. Y'all stay tuned for an announcement. I'm just letting y'all know. Final comment of this panel, Tiffany.
Roland, I just want to thank you again. The work that you've not only done personally in my life, but also for our community has been invaluable. And I know that it was a lot of work to put this event on. I also know that you came out of pocket for it. So I want to thank you for your leadership, for your dedication to making sure that our voices are heard. In addition to that, I want to, the young voices and the millennials, I know you got it confused, I'll explain it later, but for millennials, as anybody that's under 35, and this panel right here has all of the answers. The young people in the room have all of the answers. The young people around DC and in your local communities, we have the answers. Folks aren't listening to us. And so what needs to happen moving forward is that if we continue to have conversations like this, educate and share and create new knowledge together. Not decide what is right and what is wrong, but create new knowledge together, then we can take over these institutions, we can run the country, and we can change the world. So I just want to thank you again, Roland.
Y'all give it up for Tiffany, Dayvon, Simone, Josecline, Eugene. Thanks a lot. So don't leave just yet. We're almost done. We're almost done. And so just to give folks, first of all, the NAACP number for you to text NAACP to 40649, 40649. And then that way, all elections, other sort of updates you'll actually get. So go to 40649 and text NAACP. So we wanted to end this a different way, of course, and that was talking to my man, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber. So we're going to actually move our panel out. We're going to bring him in. And so there were a lot of people who I reached out to participate in this forum. Again, we literally put this together in 2 weeks. It was put together in 2 weeks. And so I reached out to various people. Last night I was in New York for Susan Taylor's National Gerrymandering Gala. Cicely Tyson was one of the folks honored to Ronald Burke, as well as Reverend Dr. William J. Barber. 2018, we've already talked about this being the 50th anniversary of the sanitation workers strike in Memphis, the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, also the 50th anniversary of the Kerner Commission report on the race riots that took place in 1967, the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act that was passed in 1968, but it's also the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's Campaign, the last campaign Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference led. And so Reverend Barber has been traveling around this country with Repairs of the Breach and so many other organizations putting together this amazing multiracial, multicultural coalition of people. And so there was no other person who I wanted to include. And we talked about having him on the panel. And so then last night I said, forget that. I want you to close it out. And so while Donald Trump is giving his summation at the State of the Union, we've been monitoring it over here. I wanted Dr. Barber to give us our send-off. And before I toss to him, this is the last thing that people have to understand. And a lot of church people really get this wrong. So right before church is about to be over, folks start tipping out, run to the parking lot. But anybody who understands church, that the most important prayer in a service is actually the benediction. It's the benediction. There's a reason you're supposed to stay for the benediction, because it is the prayer going forth as you're leaving. And so when y'all skip out on church, you're missing the most important prayer. And so he will close this out and essentially will give us our benediction, but it ain't going to be 30-second benediction. It's going to be our closing comments. So put your hands together for the former state conference president of the NAACP in North Carolina, the senior lecturer for Repairs of the Breach, my alpha brother, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber.
Good to see
Bishop
you.
William J. Barber.
Good to see you. Man, this is tough. I've been watching. Thank you. Thank you. Let's give it up for Roland Martin. And I mean, really, because you know there's a scripture in the Bible that says every movement needs a Baruch, and that's the person who writes and who makes sure that the message actually gets out. So tonight, as we come here and we have the nation online and we thank the NAACP and those millennials, weren't they powerful? And the former panel, we really ask God's blessings and grace on us to stand strong in this moment, And Pastor, I just want to read a little something, and I want to read it in the millennial version of the Bible. And I want to use it as a launching pad for tonight. It reads like this. Don't know if you've ever heard it before, but it says, I'm angry. Ezekiel chapter 2 says, I'm angry. God says, I'm angry because your priests are violating my law and desecrating my holy things. Your politicians have become like wolves, prowling and killing and taking whatever they want. And your preachers are covering up for the politicians by pretending to have received visions and revelations. They say, this is what God says, and I, God, have not said a thing. And because your politicians are like wolves and your preachers are covering up for your politicians, extortion is rife. Robbery is epidemic. The poor and the needy are being abused. and the immigrants and the strangers are being kicked around at will with no access to justice, I looked around for somebody to stand in the gap against all of this, and I could not find anyone. My brothers and sisters, in this moment, I believe, Roland, that we've got to be clear that it's movement time again. Tonight, we're going to hear, the nation will hear from Donald Trump at the State of the Union. But any political leader must be judged not by the teleprompter words that they say, but by the policies they embrace and advocate. A tree is known, a president is known, a Congress is known by the fruit it bears. I said, Roland and I often texting, and I was texting a few weeks ago when everybody got all upset about the profane word that the president used in a meeting. And I said to folk, well, that's profanity, but it's not cursing. The Bible, whenever it speaks of cursing, is talking about policies. Policies that hurt the least of these is a form of cursing. That's what cursing is. And then somebody got really upset about the porn star. And I said, well, that's something serious, and that's between him, his God, his wife, and his family, and those kinds of things have built-in consequences. But in the Bible, there's a greater adultery because it has a greater impact on more people. And in Hosea and Amos and throughout the scripture, it's called a whoring after other gods. It is when one does everything you can to be against justice and against the poor and against the least of these. And you use power to inflict pain on the most vulnerable. I would surmise that we have a lot of cursing going on in policy. I would surmise that not just Trump, but this extremist Congress that I believe really likes his tweets and his antics because they never separate from his agenda. So they let him be a distraction, and they want us to follow the distractions, while underneath the distractions, they are deconstructing the American project. And the question for us now is not, can the Democratic Party survive or the Republican Party? I'm an independent. I've been one for a long time. The question is America possible? Is America possible? We would do well in this moment because anytime you're in a moment like this, your analysis must be deep. It can't be shallow. It can't be from the hip. It can't be naive. We would do well to remember that the leadership of every white supremacy campaign in the U.S. history has called for peace and law and order. Every campaign rooted in racism and classism has claimed that what they were doing was good for the economic health of the nation, and that there would be some trickle-down effect from the stock market or the wealth rising at the top. The same con has been used by every oppressive cover-up. That's one lesson the nation needs to stop saying we've never seen this before. If you know history and world history, we've seen it and we are seeing it. My brothers and sisters, I believe, are in the midst of a third reconstruction in America. We are in the midst of the fundamental changing of demographics around the world. And until we began to understand this and how extreme policy in America today is driven by a fear of the browning and blackening of this nation's demographics and the possibility of that black and brown growing demographic aligning with progressive whites to build a fusion that embraces every creed, every color, every class, and every sexuality and every gender. Until we understand that, we will not clearly see why so-called America First enthusiasts are willing to work so hard and cheat so much to undermine the basic tenets of the American democracy. For instance, Trump and Putin are not connected by political party. What binds them goes much deeper: white hegemony and white nationalism that is strengthened by enormous wealth. And when I say a third Reconstruction, I first want us to understand in American history where we are right now. One of the problems of the way we do American analysis is too often, and Roland and I talk about this all the time, is we act as though there's not a past connected to the present. As Dr. Painter at Princeton said, all you're seeing now is the call and response of American history. She calls it the iconography of a very familiar process in the American stream of history. For instance, right after slavery was over, there was a period called the Reconstruction in the South where blacks and poor whites came together and changed this nation. They rewrote all the constitutions in the South. In the South. They took over every Southern legislature, black and poor white folk, free and former slaves and poor whites. When they took office and took power with the movement, the Reconstruction movement, they rewrote the constitutions. They guaranteed voting for all men. They didn't do women yet, but for all men. They rewrote the criminal justice laws, black and white. They guaranteed public education as a right in state constitutions. I'm not talking about 1968. I'm talking about 1868. Black and white. They sent black senators from the South to Washington, D.C., and congressmen. Almost every Southern legislature was controlled either by a majority black legislative body or a majority black-white fusion. They began to talk about guaranteeing a living wage, 1868. They pushed the 13th Amendment, outlawing slavery, the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, the 15th Amendment, the voting rights. By 1875, we passed a law outlawing discrimination. There was talk of Frederick Douglass becoming president. No, I'm not talking about in 1988. I'm talking about in 1878 and 68, in that time. But during that period of time when the aristocracy, the white aristocracy that used to be the former owners of the slaves, saw this power of black and white fusion coming together, they could not stand it. And by 1872, the Ku Klux Klan was founded not at first to challenge black people, but to challenge white people who were working with black people. And then in 1877, we had a presidential election. There's a lot of history. I'm not going to do it all. But in 1877, we had an election, and a president lost the popular vote. In 1877, his name was Rutherford B. Hayes. He lost the popular vote, but was put in office through the Electoral College, and he promised those that gave him the Electoral College, if you will give me the Supreme Court and the federal courts, then we'll put you in office. And by 1883, the Civil Rights Act of 1865 was overturned. And there was only one vote on the Supreme Court that did it. It was a white man from Kentucky named Justice Harlan. And he was the same only white man that voted against Plessy versus Ferguson. By 1896, you had Plessy versus Ferguson separate but equal. 1898, you had the Wilmington riots in North Carolina that sent a signal of how to put black people back in their place. Black voting went down because of Jim Crow laws. Yesterday was the anniversary of the last African-American, George White, being put out of the United States Congress in 1901. And another one didn't return from North Carolina until 1990. 1914, Woodrow Wilson gets elected, had been president of Princeton and governor. He gets elected. He plays Birth of a Nation in the Oval Office. Birth of a Nation, 100 years before Bannon. He put white supremacy in the Oval Office and that celebrated the Klan and said that black and white fusion movements would destroy this country. And in 1919, the statue that they marched around in Charlottesville was commissioned, that Confederate statue, not to honor the Confederacy, but to honor the return of white supremacy to the law as the law of the land, and to honor Woodrow Wilson. And then there was a second Reconstruction in the 1960s, beginning in 1954 with the Brown decision. And then you saw the rise of the Civil Rights Movement, black and white and brown coming together, and Jew and Gentile, as Dr. King said. And we began to see push. Social Security was opened up to black and brown people in 1954 because it wasn't open to people in the agrarian culture and in the domestic culture in 1935 when it was first passed. Many programs that had been open only to whites suddenly began to be opened up to black and brown people, and all of a sudden they became dangerous entitlements. You get the Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65, as Roland was just saying. And this is coming because of a fusion black movement that is beginning to shift. And at that time, they didn't even shift necessarily who was in office. They shifted the context that the people in office had to operate in and force people to vote in ways they weren't intending to vote. But because there was a movement, because parties are not going to build a movement. I just thought I'd say that out here. You're not going to get a movement from the parties. There has to be a movement that pushes the parties. Right? And then you had something around 1968 come in called the Southern Strategy. And the Southern Strategy was, how can we use the politics of George Wallace without the N-word? And how can we make black and white people be against each other, the ones that really need to be allies, poor and hurting, black and white? How can we separate them? And how can we target 13 southern states from Virginia to Texas so that we can control 13 states? Now, I know some of you say, well, 13 states, what difference does that make? Well, if you control 13 states from Virginia to Texas, you control 171 electoral votes. Now, you only need 270 to get elected president. So if you control 171 with just 13 states, you only need 99 from the other 37 states. And then if you can play that game in the Rust Belt a little bit, and in the Bible, in the Wheat Belt, and then some of the enclaves in the North, pitting people against one another who ought to be allies, then you can control, they believe, you can control elections for another 50 years. And the Southern Strategy started in 1968. And this is the 50th year. You better hear what I'm saying, America. And the goal was to never, you can't be Wallace, you can't be outright racist, you can't use racist words, right? But Kevin Phillips told Nixon, I'm going to teach you a new way to talk. I want you to talk about entitlement reform and racialize that and basically say to poor and other white folk that because of these entitlements, the very entitlements that they use the most of, but because of these entitlements and black folk getting money and brown folk getting money from the entitlement, that's why you're poor. So entitlement reform, forced busing, states' rights. And then Lee Atwater said, we even got more sophisticated than that. We started talking about tax reform. And he said it didn't sound racist, it sounded economics. But the byproduct of it is black and brown people got hurt worse than other people because of the policies out of this that came from this language, but also it blinded the eyes of many of our white brothers and sisters not to see that they would be voting against their own self-interest. And the 50th year is this year. And if you understand that history, then you understand that how we come to a Trump, and that Trump is not the problem. Trump is a symptom of a deeper moral malady. And Trump is a symptom, and not just him, McConnell and Ryan are symptoms that something has happened in the ethos of the political atmosphere of this nation, where the majority of folk in the media can't even see how this stuff is being played out, how it's being used to manipulate the mind. And so in the 50th year of the Southern Strategy, you get another president who loses by 3 million votes. You can't certify that election. Loses by 3 million votes, right? Wins the whole South for the most part, and the Rust Belt and the Wheat Belt. Loses by 3 million votes. Wins by what they say 80,000 votes gave him the Electoral College. And in Wisconsin, for instance, where he so-called won by 30,000 votes, there were 250,000 suppressed black votes. So you have somebody in office who has not won, but the system, the Southern Strategy, has worked just like it worked in 1877. And that he is a symptom of a deeper malady. And so, my brothers and sisters, when we look at this, how do you treat the real issue, the problem that's really there of what's going on? I believe that we are in the middle of a third Reconstruction. And people wouldn't be fighting this hard if we were weak. I'm not just talking about black people. I'm talking about the possibility of a whole new electorate rising. And I think that's what really scared people. It wasn't President Obama. It was the electorate that came together that exposed the breakages in the solid South, that exposed the possibility of black and brown people and red people and all that coming together and create a new election. And that's why on day one, they said, because Trump didn't just get elected because of what happened in 2016, Trump is the result, and many people in the Congress, of what's been planned for years. The voter suppression and the voter gerrymandering and the not having statehood in Washington, D.C. All of this is a part of. And so I said tonight to myself, what scripture could help us? And I came to that Ezekiel 22. Your politicians are like wolves. God said, I can't even describe them in human terms. What they're doing, the way they're hurting poor people is almost animalistic. And I talked about when you take health care from poor people so you can give tax breaks to the greedy, that's devouring the poor. It says your politicians are like wolves who devour the poor. That's devour. In fact, when you pass a tax plan that takes more money from the backs of poor and working poor people than the cost or what they call the receipt price of slaves in 1863. $3 trillion is the transfer of more. You have to go all the way back to slavery to understand that level of wealth transfer. And that's what just happened. And sadly, Pastor, even in the Congress, Democrats and Republicans talked about the middle class. They did not talk about how the racist impact of this budget or the class impact of this budget or how it's hurting poor people. Devouring. When you spread lies about voter fraud and you enact laws that suppress the votes of poor people. Since 2010, we've had 23 states to engage in voter suppression. 23 states. The Brennan Institute says there are about 12 to 16 seats in the Congress that wouldn't even be in the party they're in if it wasn't for racialized gerrymandering. We won a case in North Carolina where the Supreme Court, even Clarence Thomas had to vote and say it was surgical racism. But when you pass voter suppression laws, that is devouring the poor in a democracy. When you lock more and more black and brown and poor whites up, while at the same time you cut money for education, that is devouring the poor. When you rob DACA students of their dreams, and be careful, be real clear, black folk, black people have no business being against our Latino brothers and sisters for two reasons. Number one, Mexico was anti-slavery before America. They need to understand that. And number two, we can't agree to anything that would say we'll give the DACA students their immigration as long as the DACA students allow us to attack all the other immigrants. We already been through that. It's called the house Negro versus the field Negro. We don't play that game, and we can't allow that to be played. Something is wrong when we pit students against sick children that need insurance. That's devouring the poor. When companies are deregulated and they pull out of climate accords, that's devouring the earth and devouring the poor. And the poor always suffer first from ecological devastation. When we right now are providing 53 cents of every discretionary dollar to the military-industrial complex, 53 cents, that's devouring the poor. Right now, 50 years after Dr. King's death, there are 40 million people in extreme poverty, 47 million. 22 million of them are white. 22 million of them are white, more whites than blacks in extreme poverty in terms of raw numbers, not percentage of their rate. There are over 140 million poor people in this nation right now. People who work every day, 62 million people who work every day of their life, sometimes 50 hours, and make less than a living wage right now. And 54% of African Americans who work and make less than a living wage. That is policies that are devouring the poor. But then Ezekiel says something else. He says your preachers cover up for the politicians. And we must be clear today that there's always been a cover-up as far back as Pharaoh and his false preacher magicians, and the false prophets that challenged Jeremiah and Isaiah, and the slave preacher that would preach about heaven on Sunday and then enslave black bodies on Monday through Sunday. There's always been false prophets. The ones that stood up against Dr. King, they've always been. And what we must be clear today that there is a brand of Christian nationalism that will praise the wolves while they devour the poor. And whenever these things line up, an attack on voting rights, an attack on wealth and money, living wages, attack on unions, attack on education, whenever we see the call for massive tax cuts, and also the attempt to use religion to cover up hate and injustice and racism, whenever those things line up, you are in the middle of a reconstruction of America. And the question is, will we reconstruct it or deconstruct it? And that's why, my brothers and sisters, if we understand that, we can't allow the cover-up. We must speak up, stand up, and vote up like never before. I'm telling you, it's movement time in America. And there are three things, and I'm through, I believe, Roland, we have to have in this moment. And I'm not talking party, I'm talking movement. First, we must have a movement, direct action, and civil disobedience campaign. A massive, I believe this, it took mass civil disobedience in the first Reconstruction and the second Reconstruction. And this mass civil disobedience is not about saving a party, but about changing the moral narrative. When people can run for office and look you in your eye and say, elect me and I'll take your votes and rights. Elect me and I'll snatch your health care away. Elect me and I won't even vote for you to have a living wage. I mean, tell you right up front. That's not a political problem alone. That's a deep moral issue. Huh? And there are 5 areas that I believe, and we believe in our movement, that interlock. They're interlocking. Somebody say interlocking. Interlocking. They're interlocking injustices. Systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of Christian nationalism and white evangelicalism. Those 5 issues, they hook together. And you can't separate one from the other. You can't address racism without addressing systemic poverty. You can't address poverty and have some kind of neoliberal critique that doesn't address racism. You can't do one without the other. They connect together. And we must have a massive civil disobedience movement of all different kinds of people, and we must go to the places of power, not just outside and away, but in the very halls of power. I'm talking about in Ryan's office, and in McConnell's office, and in state capitals. Ezekiel said, who will stand in the gap? Jeremiah 22 says, I need you to go down to the king's house and demand that they stop hurting the poor and stop hurting the immigrant and stop hurting the vulnerable. And we must have moral leaders and impact. But I'm not talking about building a stage for somebody to come and speak on behalf of impacted people, but impacted people having the stage themselves. And so from Mother's Day to June 21st, which is the anniversary of Swanner, Traynor, and Goodman being killed, we are starting the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, not in commemoration of what happened 50 years ago, but launching a multi-year movement. It will be direct action, civil disobedience, power training, how to build power, and voter mobilization in 32 state capitals and the District of Columbia. People, and it's going to be rooted, not just people being angry, but 6 weeks rooted in an agenda. So people are clear about what we stand for. And the first week and the first Monday of action will focus on children and women in poverty, because 72% of those in poverty are children and women. And then secondly, and then lastly, we need a movement with a determined agenda. You cannot just be angry at Trump. You really think if we get rid of Trump, Pence is better? Trump is just a symptom. You can't just fight Trump. In fact, right now, you don't want to just fight Trump. We got a mid-year election we're dealing with. And if you want to change it, we've got to change the Congress. But you can't just fight Trump. We need a movement that says we're not just angry at the symptom. We're here to push for living wages. We're here to push for empowerment zones. We're here to challenge the criminal justice system. We want full restoration of the Voting Rights Act so that these people cannot continue. We continue to implement voter suppression. We want not the Affordable Care Act. We want that and universal health care for every person. We want just immigration. We want that. We want correction in our criminal justice system. We want, Dr. King said, if you're not willing to fight for a guaranteed income from the poor, you might as well stop talking about dealing with poverty. He said because the issue is not scarcity of wealth, it's the scarcity of will. And then we need defined movement voter mobilization. Let me say this. Did you know that if we just changed 10 to 12% of the voter turnout in a mid-year election, if it just went up 10% beyond norm, you can override some of this voter suppression. Just 10%, not 20%. Did you know, as I said in Wisconsin, that 250,000 votes were suppressed? Did you know that down in Alabama, yes, Roy Moore was beaten by about a percentage point, but there were thousands of people stayed home. There are thousands of people not registered. Do you know if you registered 30% of the unregistered black voters in the 13 southern states, and then they connected with progressive whites and Latinos, that you could flip North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, and Texas tomorrow? And do you know if you vote like that, and then as Roland said, and then hold people accountable, don't just vote, but show your power and then hold them accountable with your power. So I believe that one of the things we have to do, and if we mobilize this 140 million poor and working poor people, and see, a lot of them aren't voting because they never hear their name or their issue. Think about it. We went through 26 presidential debates, Democrat and Republican, and we didn't have 1 hour on poverty. Think about it. Not 1 hour on poverty, not 1 hour on systemic racism, not one presidential candidate was asked, if you get elected, will you fight for full restoration of the Voting Rights Act? And we have less voting rights today than we had August 6, 1965, when the Voting Rights Act was first passed. We didn't have 1 hour on the war economy. We didn't have 1 hour. We were talking about innuendos and text messages and women in the back room and all that kind of stuff. We have to change the very moral narrative. And it's not going to be changed from the party. They're still talking about white working class. That's all they're talking about, like they in the black working class. I mean, come on. We need a movement that forces a new agenda. And then we need to have this massive, directed, defined voter mobilization. I believe we have to vote for at least the next 6 years, starting this year, like they voted the first year in South Africa. You remember how they were? They were standing everywhere. They were everywhere. Touch your neighbor and say everywhere. And we've got to stop fighting each other and start fighting extremism. And we've got to recognize that the people and the extremists, I don't call them Republicans, I call them extremists because my granddaddy was a Republican, but he was a Lincoln Republican. He was a Teddy Roosevelt Republican. I call them extremists. But whether it's extremists on the Republican side or the scared folk on the Democratic side, whoever they are, we have to stop fighting each other and fight racism and sexism and xenophobia. And we got to understand if they can come together for the love of money. And what you're finding out is they don't have to agree all the time to come together. Sometimes we make the mistake. We got to have 99.9% agreement. But we have found out that these mean folk, they will come together for the love of money, won't they? Trump can talk about their mama, but as long as he signs a tax bill, they'll come together. And I stopped by to tell you, if they are cynical enough to come together, we better be smart enough to come together. And come together for love and justice, and it's time for us to come together around this broad agenda, and it's got to be everybody. Now, how you know you got to come together? Because the Bible told me so. You see, in the 22nd chapter of Ezekiel, since we're in a church tonight, God said, I looked for somebody to stand in the gap, and I could not find anybody. The chapter ends in a miserable way. But then 15 chapters later, in the 37th division of Ezekiel, God says to Ezekiel, I know where you can find somebody to beat back the wolves. I know where you can find a group of people that will beat back the lying preachers, but you got to go down in the valley of dry bones. In other words, you got to go down in that place they call the shithole. I mean, you got to go down there. And if you go down there, you're going to find some bones down there. Now, I know they look like bones. They look like dry bones. They look like the wolves have torn them apart. But they are the people down there. And these bones in the valley, they represent the bruised and the battered and the beaten down and the oppressive by the oppressive forces of the world. They are the people who've injustice, look like injustice has won. They are the people whose spirit and life has been taken out of them by the constant battering of the language and the actions of hate and injustice. Dry bones. Those who are poor, who have been told their poverty is their own fault. Dry bones, children among us who've been discounted and criminalized because of the color of their skin and the economic location. Dry bones, the sick who have heard mean politicians declare that giving people health care is un-American and a form of communism. Dry bones, the workers that are beaten down by the battering rams of anti-union forces and corporate greed. Dry bones, the immigrants who've been called aliens and vilified in a land of immigrants where people want to put rules in place now that their own great-great-grandmama couldn't have passed if they were trying to come in there. The dry bones are the gay people and the transgender people who've been told in so many ways that they're hated and that God doesn't love them and neither does America. The dry bones, African Americans who see mean and power-drunk politicians working to take away their voting rights. Dry bones, people who have voted for people time and time again, but then those people turn their backs on them once they get into office. Dry bones. There are dry bones lying all around, but God says to Ezekiel, that's your army. That's the army, those dry bones that are down there. And they might look like they're dry and they might look like they're dead, but dry bones still have ears. And if you'll go down in the valley and preach to the dry bones, then those dry bones will come together. I'm telling you, I've been preaching to the dry bones. I went out to Seattle among the homeless white folk, and there's a young girl out there that said, Reverend Barber, I'm joining the movement because I'm the white trash that they threw out but forgot to burn. Lord have mercy. I went down, I went down to El Paso and the immigrants down in Texas. We walked in the middle of the Rio Grande River, and they're joining the movement. I went to the Apache Nation and sat in the middle of the circle and played the drums and sat there with the elders, and the 500 Apache nations have been sending out the cry that it's time for us to come together. Went with the national welfare rights workers in California and Detroit, and those welfare rights workers that were part of the original Poor People's Campaign, some of them are 60 and 70 years old. They said, we ready for one more battle, one more battle. Went down to Alabama, and there's a mother whose girl died in her arms because Alabama did not expand Medicaid expansion. And she said, my baby didn't die for anything. I'm ready to march. I'm ready to stand up. I'm ready to try. I wonder, are there any dry bones in here? Are there any poor folk? Are there some poor bones in here? Can I get one to come down here? Can I get a poor bone to come down here? Can I get somebody that needs a living wage to come down here? Can I get a woman to come down? I mean, really, come down here. Is there a bone in the house? Is there a bone in the house? Are there some millennial bones in the house? Are there some folk that fought back in the 60s, but you got one more fight in you? Are there any white folk in here that know we got to build coalition? Come on down here. Come on down here. Are there any gay bones in here down here? Are there any straight bones down here? Anybody that needs health care, or you know somebody needs health care, you better come on down here, because this the army. Anybody that works hard every day, but you don't make a living wage, come on down here. Anybody that wants more education for your children, come on down here. Come on down here. Any brothers that the system did you wrong and locked you up, but they should have kept you, because now that you're out, you're going to fight, you're going to fight. Look, I'm telling you, will the dry bone just hook up a little bit? Because they tell me in the valley that the foot bone connected to the ankle bone, you know what I'm saying? And the ankle bone connected to the knee bone. What I'm trying to say is when the black and the white and the brown and the red and the yellow and the Christian and the Muslim and the Sikh and the Hindu and the Jewish and the gay and the straight and the southerner and the northerner, when all these dry bones get together, they tell me there'll be a shaking in the valley. There's going to be a shaking on Capitol Hill. There's going to be a shaking on Capitol Hill. There's going to be a shaking in state capitals, and we are going to make the third Reconstruction a reality, and we're not going to give up on the American project. Too many tears have been cried. Too much blood has been shed, and the dry bones are right. There's an army rising. There's an army rising. There's an army rising. There's an army rising. And this army will be able to break every chain. Let's go out and come up from the valley. The last thing they should have called us was shithole, because we know how to take that stuff and make fertilizer and build a new movement.
Amen.
Give it up, y'all. Give it up, Dr. William J. Barber. Give it up, Dr. Barber. We have, if you could take your seats, just one last thing. One last thing. This was not initially the plan for tonight. I was going to do this later. Before we started, I got a phone call from one of the most powerful African Americans in Hollywood. He called me and he said, man, I've been watching your videos on YouTube. He said, man, we absolutely need your voice. And he said, I heard the TV One had canceled your show. Surely you got something next. And we began to talk, and I began to share with him. And I've heard from people all across the country, folks from all around the country. From the moment we announced the show, folks were emailing and calling, and they were writing, and they are still doing it. My aunt died of pancreatic cancer Sunday before last, and I'm at her funeral Saturday in Kansas City, and folks are coming up to me at the funeral. The pastor is speaking from the pulpit. Here we are with her homegoing, and he's talking about another voice. And the next day when I went to St. James United Methodist Church, just seeing so many people. And so whether it's folks who are not on TV, not in Hollywood, folks who are, it's been amazing, the reaction. And so when I was sitting there when I was told that the show was ending. I didn't flinch, I didn't move, I didn't respond at all. I was already thinking about who I was going to call and what was next. And so we began to put that whole thing together. And so ever since then, that was December 9th or something like that, been talking to people, what can we do, what can we talk about doing. And so we began to talk about these daily streams and what we can do. And so we put together this event. We'll be in Memphis on Thursday night from the National Civil Rights Museum. And so I was going to do this from there because the plan is on April 2nd, I will launch the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily live stream that will be a daily show. It will be a daily show that will be distributed across all of the digital channels, and so you don't have to subscribe to anything, just those channels. It will be on Facebook, Periscope, YouTube. I've been having conversations with folks at Facebook. I've been talking to folks at Twitter. I'm having conversations with folks at YouTube about whether we do it exclusively with one of them or we do it with all three of them. And the idea is for us, the same show you watched for 4 years, the exact same show, being able to have our panels, to have our experts, to have all of our guests, also allowing for us to be able to do this show remotely. And so this summer, I'm going to be honored by Alpha Kappa Alpha at the Abule in Houston. And so the idea is to be able to broadcast the show from there, to be able to take the show on the road. We'll be far more mobile with the technology that we've used. It was interesting, Tiffany talked about in terms of this event, and I didn't do this event with TV One, didn't do it with any other network. We did it ourselves, and so spent the last few months spending upwards of $75,000 acquiring equipment because, again, being able to own it ourselves. And so we're going to launch this. We have our production team, the folks you've been seeing around here, folks who are going to be working on the show. That's what I've been working on. And Dr. William Spriggs was talking about in terms of labor and what it means to African Americans. And so I'm proud to announce that the first underwriter for this is AFS-CME. Lee Saunders, of course, is a leader of the first underwriter for the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Live Show. And I thank them for putting their money where their mouth is. I met with them literally on a Thursday before Christmas. They called me 24 hours later saying we're in. I've been talking to other black ad agencies and other advertisers as well, other sponsors, because we want this to be powered by the people. That way to ensure that we have an independent voice, because just last year we celebrated the 190th anniversary of Freedom's Journal, the first black newspaper, founded in March of 1827. In the lead editorial of that paper, they wrote, "We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us." When you think about Claude Barnett, there's an amazing book by Gerald Horne out about Claude Barnett and the Negro Associated Press and what they meant in terms of being able to speak to our stories, issues across the African diaspora. At one point in that book, in the late 1800s, there were 12,000 black newspapers created between 1865 and 1900. But we are now in a position where we literally have fewer than 100 black newspapers. With the cancellation of News One now, there's no daily news show on television that speaks to our interests. When people see tomorrow night, the BET is going to have a special with Angela Rye called Angela Rye, State of the Union. But do understand that I was the first one to put her on television. When you watch David Swerdlick and when you watch Shamichael Singleton and when you watch Paris Denard and you watch all of these folks, they first got their shot by putting them on News One Now. And so imagine not having a platform for us to be able to showcase the next generation of young, smart African Americans. And not just them. You heard Kristen talking about it. The networks weren't always calling them when the cases they were doing, but every time they filed a lawsuit, we had them on the air. And so it's important for us to have this platform. So what we're doing is this here. In addition to AFL-CIO being our underwriter, and we're talking to others, I also have set a target of 20,000 people who will contribute $50 a year, because the goal for us is to raise just from the people $1 million. Because the reality is, it costs to travel, it costs to have staff to be able to do the content. And so we've been, so if you actually go to, because we've had folks been signing up, they've been going to all the different websites. Before I give the website, though, we put some stuff together, and so we can't see it in here, but the folks of the live stream will actually see promotional video we put together. Now, the song you hear, you're going to hear the voices, you're going to say, man, they sound familiar. Well, about 5 years ago, we were talking about some theme songs for News One Now, and I asked some friends of mine in the music business to put some stuff together, and Terry Ellis and Cindy Heron of En Vogue put something together, and they made the decision not to use it. Well, when at the opening of the Smithsonian, Terry came up to me and she said, hey, Cindy and I have a gift for you. And they said, Roland, we're going to gift you this song because of what you have done for our people. And so this is going to be the theme song to Roland Martin Unfiltered. But the folks at home, you will see the video. Jay, go ahead and play it.
Whatever the biz, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funky, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin!
That's it. So what I want folks to do, I want them to go to RolandSMartin.com. We have an email sign up on there. We've already collected more than 10,000 emails from folks. And want you to go to the site right now. If you're here in the room, if you're on the stream, go to RolandSMartin.com and put in your email. And what we're then going to do is we're creating what, because some of y'all hear me always talking about Bring the Funk, we're creating the Bring the Funk fan club. And that's what that will be. I've also already set up, through my company's New Vision Media, we've already set up the New Vision Media Foundation to do the show through. And so the folks who are donating, they actually will be also getting a tax write-off for this as well. And when I was reading Gerald's book on Claude Barnett, the Negro Associated Press actually was a nonprofit as well. The ProPublica, the Marshall Project, the Daily Caller, the Texas Tribune, they're also nonprofit media companies. This, to me, is a much better option for us to be able to do it, because the fear that I've always had, look, I've run 3 black newspapers. I was a news editor. I was a founding editor of BlackAmericaWeb.com, and I was a news editor of Savoy Magazine, and this is my 11th black media experience. And the fear that I have is that we will be asking somebody else to tell our story. And you heard Reverend Barber talk about narrative. When you heard Dayvon talking about infrastructure, when he was talking about funding our infrastructure, I literally had somebody text me saying, man, how are you going to monetize this? And I said, I'm already having those conversations. And to understand the power of this, to understand literally the power of this, not just the folks who are in the room. I've already checked. About 27,000, almost 30,000 on Periscope have watched us since we started. More than about the same number on YouTube. We've already exceeded 130,000 views on Facebook. But last I checked before I started, more than 800,000 people have been reached just by watching this tonight. And so, by being able to launch this, and we're purposely launching it April 2nd from Memphis, the site where everyone will be gathered for the assassination, a commemoration of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and we've been talking to other folks, and so you'll hear more of our underwriters coming aboard, but I really want to hit that 20,000 because I would prefer to have this powered by the people. Because when we are able to sustain our own organizations, our own entities, then they don't get canceled. Then they don't go away. Then they serve as a training ground for the next round of journalists, for the next folks who want to be videographers, for the folks who want to shoot, all of that. That's why we must do this. And so it's very easy for me to say, sure, let me go talk to another network and let's see. They have a contributors deal. And this Sunday I'll be on ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos and looking forward to that. But we have to have not a weekly show. News is moving way too fast. I'm still flooded with people about stories. I mean, you saw the case in Baltimore where the former cops are shaking people down who did no wrong, and they're on trial right now. When you get the brother in Jacksonville, Arkansas, where they burned down his barn, stole his car, poisoned his dog and killed it, painted nigger on the side of a barn, trying to run him out. And I chatted with him via Skype the other day, and his sister, Ashley Ray, his name is Kevin Fowler. These things are happening every single day, and it pains me daily since December 21st to see these stories and know that mainstream media will not cover any of these stories. And so I don't want us in a situation where we are saying, well, man, I wish we can do this. I watched George Curry literally kill himself trying to relaunch Emerge. And he was saying how important that is. And we go through all of that. This is our opportunity to control our story and our narrative. And so we're ready. Our team is ready. We are literally going to, it will be top notch. We understand the power of it. While I'm talking, Jay, of course, he's actually putting on the feed. People are seeing some of the stuff we'll be talking about. So our goal is for 20,000 folks to be a part of our fan club to make this happen. And again, I believe this will put us in a position where our story will always be told, and we can focus on these issues every single day. And we'll be doing more of these events as well, and also live streaming them, because again, we don't have to ask somebody else permission. We don't have to hope somebody else show up. And I want us to be in a position come 2020 that when we're talking about debates and forums, that we're able to do it ourselves. And I did one with TV One with CNN. 2020, I don't want to have to do one with CNN. We should be in a position to do one ourselves and not have to have any other media partner. That's where we are. And so I appreciate all of you for coming out. I appreciate everybody for watching this. Look for more information. Again, go to RolandSMartin.com. Drop your email. And again, we want to hit that 20,000. If folks want to give more than 50, that's great. We'll have the incentives on there. But we hit that 20,000 at $50 each. We are well on our way. And trust me, we can change the game, change the paradigm. And I can tell you, you have no idea what it's like when a brother comes up to you and he says, I tape your show every day, and I will watch it with my son and daughter when we were eating dinner, or we will watch it before we go to work. Well, with this show, unlike when we had the show News One Now, it's not going to be aired only one time a day. We'll restream it 5 times a day. It'll be available on VOD. You can watch it anytime. So if you're in the West Coast, you don't have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. If you're working at 7 a.m., you can watch it when you get home. This is the opportunity for us to use new technology to be able to change the game. And we're purposely launching in April because we want to have an impact on the 2018 midterm elections. So, folks, thanks a bunch. Also, I was given this 10,000 Black Men's March Saturday, April 21st, here in D.C. Also, National Black Men's Convention. Go to blackmensmovement.org. Folks, thank you so very much. We will see you next time. Give it up for the folks at Shiloh Baptist Church and Pastor Wallace for allowing us to be here. Thank you so very much. Y'all have a great night.